All right, it looks like it's 10 a.m. here on November the 3rd. I see a quorum is present. Cheryl, can you call the roll?
Chair Josh McGee.
Here.
Keith Bernard.
Here.
Andrew Cable.
Here.
Stephanie Leiby. Here. Robert Mathengale.
Here.
Robert May.
Here.
Ernest Richard.
Okay.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to item number 3, discuss and consider board administrative matters, including the approval of last meeting's minutes. The minutes were from August 4th, 2016. The chair entertains a motion to suspend the reading of the minutes. Motion made and seconded to suspend reading of the minutes. Is there any discussion from the board or any corrections of the minutes as circulated? Seeing none, the chair entertains a motion to suspend the reading of the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The minutes will not be read. The minutes are approved as circulated. Moving on to item B, excusing the absence of board members from the August 4th, 2016 board meeting. The chair entertains a motion to excuse Mr. Ernest Richards from the August 4th board meeting.
So moved.
Motion made and seconded to excuse Mr. Ernest Richards from the August 4th, 2016 board meeting. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, the chair entertains a motion to excuse Mr. Ernest Richards from the August 4th board meeting. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Mr. Ernest Richards is excused from the August 4th board meeting. Moving on to agenda item number 4. We're going to receive an update on plans for addressing the funding shortfall from the City of Dallas and the Dallas Police and Fire pension system. I think we're going to hear from Mayor Mike Rawlings first. Thank you for coming today, Mayor.
Good morning, Chairman McGee and members of the Pension Review Board. Is that working? Is that live? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you for having me here today to discuss the Dallas Police and Fire pension system, which, as you know, is at a crisis point. For the last 5 years, I've felt a little bit like Chicken Little, so it's good to have you here at least to say I'm not as crazy as I've seemed to be, so thank you. First of all, I want to recognize the Executive Director of the Dallas Police and Fire Pension Fund, Kelly Gottschalk, who you'll be hearing from in a moment. Thank God for Kelly. Her predecessor was at best incompetent, and I fear much worse. Kelly is honest, ethical, extremely intelligent, and we're very lucky to have her. The new chair, Sam Fryer, is great to work with, and so I think we're working well together. Before I get into the issues associated with the pension fund, I want to give you an update on what's happening in our part of the state. As the Dallas Morning News reported this week, our region is a magnet for high-paying work. DFW's annual growth rate in September was 3.6%, the highest amongst the nation's 13 biggest metropolitan areas. September was the 19th consecutive month that the unemployment rate in Dallas outperformed the state's unemployment rate. The city of Dallas counts more than 645,000 employed residents, and over 1 million work in our city every day as of September. Our area is home to 21 Fortune 500 companies. The city is home to 300 corporate headquarters that each employ more than 1,000 people globally. We just announced that Jacobs Engineering is moving their worldwide headquarters to the city of Dallas. Of Forbes' largest privately held companies, 7 are located in the Dallas area. So as you can see, Dallas and the surrounding cities are a growth engine for our great state of Texas. That is why it is horribly ironic that a city that has enjoyed such tremendous success, a city that has made Texas so strong and so proud, is potentially walking into the fan blades that might look like bankruptcy. Shame on me, shame on you, shame on all of us if we allow that to happen. That is what brings me before you today. In Dallas, we've known for some time that our police and fire departments were among the best in the country. On July 7th and the days that followed, the rest of the world discovered that that was true, that without question, we had the best. As you all know, we lost 4 Dallas police officers and a transit officer that night in a cowardly ambush attack. From the moments the bullets started to fly, our first responders showed a level of courage and heroism that I will be in awe of for the rest of my life. They didn't respond to those murders of their fellow officers with bitterness. They responded with a spirit of camaraderie and love for one another and for our citizens. Thanks to the leadership of now retired Chief David Brown and his officers, the story of July 7th and the days that followed was not about the kind of division we have seen in other major American cities. It was and has continued to be about professionalism and unity. That is one of the reasons why our City Council has long recognized the value of our public safety employees. Our budget allocations show that in the current fiscal year, the City Council budgeted to spend over $478 million in the police department and more than $254 million in the fire department. This is more than $730 million and represents 60% of our total general fund budget. The City Council also included an additional $4.3 million in this year's budget, the amount necessary to increase the city's pension contribution from 27.5 to 28.5, which is the maximum allowed under state statute. This is contingent on the pension members increasing their contribution by 0.5% from 8.5 to 9. 28.5%, 9%. Our records show that we value our public safety workforce. Our city is extremely grateful to them, and we want to provide both higher pay and a secure retirement. But we are facing an extremely serious crisis today, as there are 2 looming public safety financial challenges that could bankrupt the city. The first is the Police and Fire Pension Fund, which we're talking about today, which under current estimates has more than a $4 billion unfunded liability. The second issue is the ongoing pay referendum lawsuit about an election that was done in the early 80s. And while I don't need to get into the details of that lawsuit, I want you to understand that if the city gets an unfavorable ruling, it could represent an additional $4 billion hit to the taxpayers. These 2 issues combined represent that $8 billion hit. This is an equivalent to our 8 years of our whole general fund budget, 8 years of our budget. Now, the third issue is that we are in the midst of meet and confer negotiations on a new 3-year contract for our public safety employees. Frankly, that couldn't come at a worse time. We need to give them a raise, but given our struggles with the pension system and the pending lawsuit, it's difficult. But our police and fire workers are so important, we're going to power through that to make sure we succeed as a city, because we have to solve these problems if we're going to continue to be great. So how did we get here? Well, first, I mean to cast no aspersions on any current elected officials, obviously not you, and I'm trying to not take this personally either, because like you, I wasn't here when key decisions were made that led us down this road. Still, it is critical to be brutally honest about how we got in this place so we know how to fix it. The city did not cause this problem. Voters did not cause this problem. Taxpayers did not cause this problem. We do not believe we are legally responsible for this problem. but we are ready to help solve it. The problem really began in 1933 when the state legislature passed a law establishing the pension fund. The law placed governance in the hands of a pension board made up of 3 representatives from the Dallas City Council and 4 representatives from among the plan members, 2 from fire and 2 from police. Worst of all, the law requires that the fund's own members approve benefit changes. The fund members are really the ones making these decisions, and I would suggest the fox guarding the henhouse is a great metaphor. Making matters worse, the state legislature in 1993 established the DROP program, which has led to so many of the fund's financial problems. 2 years later, as a result of the state's failure to provide oversight authority to the city council and taxpayers, the police and fire pension members voted on significant plan design changes and subsequently voted to change the makeup of the board to further dilute the city's representation. Now the members have 8 representatives and the city only 4. So the police and fire pension board has the ability to make significant financial and plan design decisions without meaningful city council or taxpayer oversight. Moreover, it can do so and has done so without any consideration of how to sustain those benefits. That's why members have been able to so recklessly guarantee themselves 8 to 10% returns through the DROP program. I would love to have someone guarantee me an 8% return on my investments. As a result, there are pension fund members who are retiring with multi-million-dollar DROP accounts. This is much like a Bernie Madoff scheme, if you ask me, leaving the rest behind. The city of Dallas is feeling the impact right now of the impending insolvency of the pension fund in many ways. On October 14th, Moody's downgraded the city's general obligation debt rating to AA3 and negative outlook. But Moody's didn't stop there. The firm also changed Dallas's water sewer revenue bonds outlook to negative, our Hotel Development Corporation debt to A3, and our Downtown Dallas Development Corporation debt to A2. Other rating agencies have similarly downgraded their ratings. And we face more challenges ahead. In May 2017, the city will likely ask voters to approve a bond program focused on infrastructure improvements. At a minimum, the city needs at least $500 million for streets alone, which are in dire need of attention. So most, if not all, of the bond program will need to be dedicated to areas like that. It's going to be difficult to do that with these clouds on the horizon. So the pension problem is diminishing our capacity to provide desperately needed infrastructure and basic city services. The pension fund's problem also impacts our ability to staff our police and fire department. We are losing officers faster than anticipated because these officers are retiring for fear of losing hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in some cases millions of dollars in their DROP program. Not only is this causing additional stress to the fund, but we are experiencing significant challenges in replacing those officers because new officers don't want to join a failing pension system. The city's highest priority is to work with the state legislature in this upcoming legislative session to address the challenges associated with the Dallas police and fire pension system, so that we can continue to provide a secure retirement for the men and women who protect our city day after day. Even though we do not believe that the city is legally liable, the city stands ready to help. But we will not be able to do so without major changes in the pension fund's governance. I cannot overstate the seriousness of the situation. The Dallas Police and Fire pension system is in serious crisis because of a governance system put in place by the state of Texas, years of unsustainable and significantly generous benefits, low member contributions, and bad investments. I want to make sure that everyone understands that the City of Dallas have done nothing. City of Dallas taxpayers have done everything the state and everything our public safety professionals ask us to do. The taxpayers have never missed a payment to the pension fund. The taxpayers have contributed to a total of almost $1.1 billion over the past 10 years in direct cash deposits. And the city put an additional $127 million into the fund as part of our budget this year. It's important to note, for more than 80% of all the funds going into the pension fund, they're taxpayer contributions. But the City of Dallas taxpayer is the punching bag in this issue. The city is committed to working towards a solution to the pension fund crisis, and we're willing to do so once all stakeholders have collaborated on a solution that fixes the entire problem by requiring all parties, the city, the pension fund members, the state of Texas, to fix a share appropriate to their responsibility for the fund's current liabilities. Now, this month, members of the pension fund are scheduled to vote on initial solutions, including reducing features such as a 4% guaranteed cost of living adjustment, and lowering the guaranteed interest rate that exceed market value on those special savings accounts we talked about called DROP. However, they are also proposing increasing base benefits, which is not the direction we need to be headed. So while I appreciate the effort, these proposed changes won't get us there. Again, that's why we need a change in governance. Under the current structure, the members simply will not make the cuts necessary to stem this crisis. And currently, they have to approve it. So as good as Ms. Gottschalk and Mr. Fryer are at their jobs, their hands are really tied when it comes to fixing this mess, because they need to offer up something their members will approve. To date, there has been a complete absence of responsible governance and meaningful reform. It is the pension fund's position that the city and the taxpayers should backstop their own negligence. The city has been provided with several demands by the pension fund, including a one-time $1.1 billion payment in 2018. In order to generate enough ad valorem property tax revenue to fund this request, we would have to increase our property tax from 0.7825 cents to 1.8045 dollars per $100 valuation. This was more than 130% tax rate increase. Every single property owner in the city of Dallas would be hugely impacted by this increase. It's a ridiculous suggestion. 4 $365 million payments out over time, every 5 years, starting in 2018, which totals to $1.46 billion, along with increasing the already committed city contribution from 28.5% to 30%. It should be noted that we believe both of these two options are illegal under current law, and as the state legislature laid out in the requirements for the city and the taxpayers, we have paid every single penny. It would be illegal to do more. Finally, the Dallas Police and Fire System wants the city to pay $36 million in administrative expenses. That is more than the entire $30 million annual budget for the public library system. And this is money that goes into investment consultants and fund managers that failed in the past and would be managed by the same board structure that disallows professional and financial advisors from sitting on the board. So, I am sorry to paint such a bleak picture, but we have to realize where we are before we can solve the problem. In closing, I want to tell you that we are committed to our men and women in uniform and to providing them with a secure retirement. I'm here today because of them. I promised too many officers that have been there 10, 15, almost 20 years that we will have a retirement system for them. There are so many men and women that came under the fund before the DROP program was in place that need to make sure that they don't get punished for the acts of others. We are also committed to finding a solution to the pension fund woes, and we want to work with the state and the pension fund on that solution. We appreciate some of the initial changes the pension fund board has endorsed, but they don't nearly go far enough. We need to continue to work towards realistic, long-term solution. Lastly, whatever we do, we must ensure that the abuses that led to the pension funds threatening insolvency will never happen again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor.
You want to step away? Or you want
So do we want to ask questions?
I'd suggest we hear from Ms. Gottschalk.
I think that's right. Mayor, if you could step away, and then we'll hear
Please.
from Ms. Gottschalk, and perhaps we can entertain some questions after her presentation. Thank you for coming.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and Anu. I appreciate the opportunity to be here again. Just to remind you, I was in front of you in May to talk to you about the situation with our plan, and I gave you information at that time about how we got here, and I talked about some of the changes that we had made to that point and what we were going to do in the future. And this provides a great opportunity for me to come forward to you now to talk about what has changed and how we've progressed since then. I wanted to start by reminding you that the members of the Dallas Police and Fire Pension System have done what they need to do in the past whenever they were presented with information that the fund was not sustainable. They have cut their benefits 3 different times. In 2005, they eliminated the automatic COLA for future hires. In 2011, they lowered the benefits for a future tier of hires, and they added a contribution to members in DROP that hadn't existed before. And then in 2014, they lowered the interest rate paid to DROP members that was phased in over time. They've never once, this is the first time ever, we've gone to the city and said, we can't do this on our own and still provide a reasonable benefit to the members. So what we've been doing since May and really for the last year is as soon as the actuaries came forward with information that our fund was projected to be insolvent, the chairman, Sam Fryer, which I believe you've met before, and I'm sorry I didn't introduce him. He's our chair, and Josh Mond is our general counsel. They're my backup, which is I'm grateful for. The board has been working on plan amendment changes, and we have developed a very comprehensive set of plan design changes. The board has called for the election, as the mayor mentioned, and we're currently in the process of educating our members on the plan amendment changes. The voting will begin November 14th and will continue to November 28th. We require a 65% passage rate of our members to get these changes implemented. So the changes are in great detail on our website. We even have a fascinating 35-minute video if you are looking for something to do, maybe on election night or something like that. It's out there. It explains them all in great detail. I'll give you a high-level summary. If you want to know more detail, I'm happy to go into them. But first of all, we increased member contributions for everybody, whether you're in active drop or you're not in active drop. We're going up to 9% initially, and then up to a possible 12% if certain conditions are met going forward. We have changed the COLA. The COLA is by far, as you know, the most expensive piece of most pension plans, and especially in our pension plan. We have completely eliminated the COLA for members that are in active drop, and we have taken the COLA for retirees, and instead of right now it's a 4% simple COLA. A lot of people think it's a 4% compounded, but it's a 4% simple COLA on your entire base. We've changed that to a consumer price index COLA that is capped at 2%, and it only applies to a portion of your base benefit once you're retired. And you have to be retired 3 years, a minimum of 3 years or 62 years of age before you get any COLA at all. So we've delayed the start, and it's applying to a smaller base. So basically, that's a 75% reduction in the COLA. We have extended the comp pay calculation for members hired before 2011 to 60 months from 36 months average pay. We have a benefit supplement, which I believe was intended for a medical subsidy. We've reduced that going forward. We have changed the interest rate in DROP. Right now, we pay 6% interest. That's part of the 2014 changes where we were stepping down from the guaranteed 8 to 10% rate that the mayor discussed. We're currently paying 6%. It will go to 5%, 10/1 of 18, and then 0 after that. If it goes to 0, everybody in DROP will take their money out, so we don't want that to happen. But what we've done is, while you're in active DROP, we've lowered it to 3% immediately, and you can only get interest for a total of 7 years. So if you've already been in DROP for 7 years, you immediately go to 0. If you're retired and you still have your money in our plan, we are giving members options where, based on the liquidity they want in their accounts, they can choose different payout options. One is basically the structure we have now, which is kind of an on-demand feature, and that will pay the lowest interest rate, and these are tied to the market. So, for example, that one will pay 1% over the 91-day T-bill rate. And then we have two other scenarios. One is kind of a recurring payment option where your balance gets paid out equally over time, and the other is kind of a CD type option. And the members can pick and choose how they want to put their money. That will help us plan and help us control how that money leaves DROP. It's important to know that there is no more 8 to 10% guaranteed rate. All of these are tied to the market rates, and they beat them just by a little bit, enough to hopefully keep the money in the plan. We've also added times to deferral DROP payments into the plan. Right now, you can be in active DROP as long as you want, continue to put your payments in there for as long as you want. We're changing that to now, after 10 years in active DROP, you can continue to work for the City of Dallas, but your DROP balance will no longer increase. You're not getting interest anymore and no more future payments. You're basically forfeiting those payments. And then for retirees, right now we still have about 440 retirees that are deferring their monthly payments into DROP. And what we're doing with that is we're trying to stop being a bank. So we're saying you can continue to do that for a year, but after that, please take your retirement check. We'd like to have them take all their money right now, but unfortunately we need it. So we're doing that. Before I go on to the next page, I wanted to point out a couple things. Our actuary didn't go through each individual item and dollar cost them, but the city has an actuary, Deloitte, that they've been using, and they did dollar cost these. So they took our plan and they said, what is the impact on the liability? And what their actuary has said is the changes in COLA that we're making account to a savings of $702 million. And the changes that we're making in DROP in both the deferral piece and the interest rate account for a savings of $349 million, and those are the city's numbers. So yes, sir?
Yes, Mr. Bernard.
Those savings, is that over the funding period? Is that 20 or 30 years?
That's the total liability of the plan. So I believe
So it reduces the liability
Yes.
by that amount.
it's
Thank you.
it's over $1 billion reduction in the liability.
Thank you.
So the mayor mentioned we are increasing some of the benefits, and one of the reasons we're doing that is we have this Tier 3 group of people that were hired in 2011, and their benefit is much lower than the other people's benefit. We are now requiring that their contribution rates go up from 8.5% to 12%. They are the lowest paid people with the City of Dallas, and the mayor said, they're underpaid already. So having that big of a pay cut to those members, we thought they wouldn't appreciate that, be able to afford that, and actually vote for it. But the cost of that, according to the city's numbers, is a $5 million increase in the liability. Those are the city numbers. So we have $1 billion reduction versus a $5 million increase. Right now, those members, just to let you know, we have the multiplier is 2% for the first 20 years of service, 2.5% for the next 5 years of service, and 3% after that. That change will take their multiplier to 3% for their whole, it's retroactive back to their start date, and that's the increase in the benefit that we've added there. We've also added a benefit that really doesn't cost anything and hopefully won't cost anything in the future. It's basically the death benefit for active duty members that are not in DROP, and obviously before retirement was much lower than the other members, so we brought that up just because that's the right thing to do.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
So the effect of this would be to increase the liability by $5 million.
Right.
The reason that is small is because Tier 3 employees are young and don't have much service in the system.
Right.
What is the effect on normal cost? Go forward normal cost.
So the normal cost right now is about 13%, and we're asking them to pay 12% contribution rate.
13% for Tier 3.
For Tier 3, yes. And so if we have them go to 12%, if we get up to that level, if we meet that criteria, the normal cost, I believe, for that group goes, it's 16 and a half or 17, I can't remember which one. So our actuaries have said that it is a wash of the contributions coming in versus the long-term liability over the life of the plan. And what's important to us right now is clearly we have a cash flow issue. So I never want to kick the can down the road and have a bigger liability in the future, but we do need the cash coming into the door now, since we're facing this insolvency issue.
Could I ask a couple of questions?
Mr. May?
If I read this correctly, your actuary had said that there would be a need for a total contribution of 79% of payroll to fund the plan as it exists. And I believe that, is it 5 years, 6 years, 7 years that you run out of money? Has your actuary, or the city's actuary, said how much would that ultimate cost drop from 79% of pay to what? That's a very high rate.
Right.
I've not ever seen rates above 40, 45% total. So it's a big hurdle. Do you know how much these various changes will reduce that total required estimated contribution of 79% of payroll?
Sir, the way that our actuaries approach this is we didn't start with the 30 years to fund. I mean, that's definitely, we want to get below 30 years eventually. But what we started with was 40 years to fund, because that is the trigger for the, I can't remember, the financial
FSRP,
soundness
yep.
piece, right,
Yep.
your triggers. So we started with that number, and we said, what is the deficit at that point? And it's 72%, so you can start with 79 or 72. And what we tried to do with these plan changes is say, how much of this gap are the members making up? So if you take the city's contribution now and the members' contribution now, I think we had a 35% gap between the 72 and what's being paid in. The changes that we're proposing here made up, at the time that we first presented these to the board, 55% of that gap. That number is much lower now, and I'll explain that as we go, just because of the drop changes that have happened. But we are, at one point, we're making up more than half of the deficit. So if you want to go to 30 years to fund, you would add another 7% to that.
Half
on
of the
city side.
contribution rate deficit.
Correct.
Right. It looks like that information is included on slide number 10, so I suggest, unless there are questions about the plan, that we continue going through the deck.
So one thing I didn't make very clear is there are a couple of things that are in this plan amendment that are contingent. And one of those is contribution rates above 9%. And it's contingent on basically the city coming forward with a legally binding obligation, because we didn't want the members to put money into a plan that we know is failing, and we can't save it. So we're going to 9% immediately. We won't go to 12 without some binding obligation from the city. The other thing that's contingent is this multiplier increase for the Tier 3. So they never get to the Tier 3 if we never get to the 12%. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Can you describe what that, what would satisfy that contingency?
So Josh might be able to do a better job of that than I do. But basically, we don't want the city council to say, you know, we promised this week, and the next city council next week to be able to undo that promise. So something that can't be undone. My guess, that would be a vote of the citizens, requirement of the legislature, perhaps a debt covenant, you know, issuing bonds. I don't know if there's other things.
Yeah, I think the two things that come to mind are a change in the statute itself, 6243, or the city actually putting money into the system itself. Those are really the two things that strike me as being either something actually occurring or as binding an obligation as we can get, is something in the state law.
So moving on, the mayor mentioned this, and we do appreciate the fact that they've already put into their budget 28, to going up to 28.5%, and they will start paying that if this vote passes and we go to the 9%. He talked a lot about governance, the things that we have put into the plan, and we've actually bundled this with the plan changes just to make sure that if the benefits pass, the city will get some of the comfort that they're looking for. And a couple of the governance things are that any time we wanted to do any changes to the plan that increased the future liability of the plan, the city would basically have a veto of that. So they would have 45 days to consider whether they would support it or not. If they say, no, we don't support this plan change, it wouldn't be allowed to be voted on by the members. That's if something increases the liability. If it decreases the liability, the members could do that, and I don't think the city would mind. The other thing is right now, and this is just totally if the city wants this or not, we put in there, if they don't want council trustees as their 4 appointees, they can appoint whoever they want. If it's the CFO or a financial expert, or if they want council members, just providing them a little more expertise because we understand that the council members are often busy. So I mentioned this a little bit. Recent activity, as you've all read, I'm sure, we've had a situation where we've had more drop money leave the system than we had planned for or we would like. The way that our drop works is because of a plan amendment that happened in 2005. Members can basically, well, we give members flexibility on accessing their drop money. And right now, the way the system works is if you ask for money by the end of the day on Tuesday, we will give you your money by Friday. We expected when we started talking about plan amendments in August, we would see an increase in that activity just because people get nervous, there's more articles about it, and we did see an increase in that activity. However, we saw more activity than we expected. Just, rumors start and people think if I retire now, this isn't going to happen. They make up their own things and basically cause some of these things to happen. So the retirements, as the mayor said, have been more than expected. There was some thought that if people retired by a certain date, they would have some rights that other people didn't have. Totally not true, but a lot of people went ahead and retired. So this is a situation, it's an ongoing, evolving situation that we monitor every day, basically. We work with our financial advisors, our actuaries, and our attorneys on how do we handle this situation, and it is an evolving situation. On the next slide, I provided for you just a history of what is happening with these drop withdrawals. It is a large number. When we started at August 11, the drop accounted for 61% of our assets. So, it's something that we've always been conscious of because, it's more than half of our fund that people can take out on a weekly basis. So, we're very aware of this. On an average week, the first column on this chart is I took the 32 weeks prior to August 11th of the year and averaged them. It's basically $3.5 million a week is a typical week. Once we started talking about the plan amendments, these are the amounts that have been going out of the plan. So we had basically 3 weeks where there was a lot of money going out of the plan. One of the provisions that was in our plan and has been in our plan for a long time was that members could take money, active members could roll money from their drop account in our defined benefit plan over to the city's 401k plan. We hired new tax counsel. They took a look they were actually looking at all these plan amendment changes, and they saw that provision and said, hey, wait a minute, you shouldn't be doing that. So the board took action to close that based on legal advice because it was considered an in-service distribution. So we did that. The impact of that is basically the retirees got nervous. And the retirees, as you can see, are a little slower to react. But once word got around to them, they were all thinking, well, now we're going to close their ability to access their money. And that's why you saw the big spikes on paid out September 23rd and September 30th, because they were worried the board was going to do that. What the board did is they held a special meeting on Monday. And as I said, the window to ask for your drop is Tuesday. So the $82 million or $80 million that went out on September 30th, 95% of that was asked for before that board meeting. And what the board did after much deliberation and considering all kinds of legal and financial advice, came out and took a motion not to restrict the withdrawals out of the account. And they issued a statement to the members to say, please be patient. If you take all your money out, it's only going to harm everybody. And the members listened. And you can see that by what has happened in the future weeks. That sometimes you have spikes in these, and that's typically, you can tie them back to somebody talking in the press or something else going on. But I think what we're doing, although we don't have a restriction on drop, is working. The members need confidence and they need trust in this. And right now, this is basically all that I can give them. I can't guarantee anything. We've asked the city if they could come forward and say, your drop benefits are safe, and they're reluctant to do that for whatever their reasons are. So this is what we're doing with drop, and I know it's hard for some people to understand.
So this is from August 19th forward. Do we know what the total amount, this is actual money withdrawn from the plan?
Yes.
Not withdrawals and requests, it's withdrawn.
Yes, this is actual money that has been paid out as of last Friday.
What's the total across from the 19th of August through the 28th of October?
It's over 400 million. I'd have to add it up. I haven't added it up.
It looks like the outflows are still approaching 100 million per month.
They were, in October, they were 89 million. Yes, so.
And can you give a little more context to the September 26th decision not to restrict outflows?
Actually, that was done in closed session, so
Yeah, I mean, like Kelly said, it was a very lengthy closed session legal discussion where obviously the board considered legal opinions, but because of privilege issues, we really can't go into the details discussed. But it was clearly the period of time that the minutes reflect. There was a long conversation by the board with council.
So I fully share your desire to calm the nerves of your retirees and plan members that have the ability to withdraw funds from drop. This has a short-term effect of destabilizing the fund, and that's not good for anybody. That's not good for other members. That's not good for their own benefits, their long-term benefits. So I fully agree with that. I guess one thing that would be useful, I think, for us to know was the determination not to restrict and perhaps stabilize this short-term problem. Was it a decision based on a legal determination, or was it based on the board's own determination as to what was best?
Again, I don't think that's really something that we can address. I mean, I think the board's public motion and statements speak for themselves.
Does the board believe that they have the legal authority to restrict withdrawals from the drop program?
Again, I don't think that's something that we can address.
Any other questions about this drop withdrawal chart?
Yes, please. Is that to say that the board does not have clarity with regard to the legal protections of the benefits?
I believe the board is very clear as to what the legal protections of the benefits are.
Okay. Okay, then maybe I misunderstood. Is that something that is considered to be a confidential matter?
Well, okay, protection of the benefits is a broad concept. I mean, I'm happy, I think that, well, I don't want to speak for the board, but, so I can give my view, but I think the board understands what the constitutional penumbra in terms of covering the benefits entails. So, now drop is obviously a part of that, and drop benefits are a part of that. I cannot go into the details of what the board discussion around that was.
My individual concern is that while the bars on this chart have come down, it's probably still at a level that is causing great concern within the plan around liquidity. I think that, as I said, I share your desire to calm the nerves of members so that they don't withdraw their money, that they leave their money in and alleviate this short-term concern. However, the numbers are showing that there's still significant withdrawals from the fund. And I am wondering if there are other levers that can be pulled to stabilize the fund in the short term and make sure that we don't get to a real cash crunch that could affect benefit payments. Not that we're close to that. I'm sure you'll provide additional information on that. I just want to make sure that we're exploring all options.
the best lever is the really the thing we've been asking the city to do, and people are taking their money out for one of two reasons. One is because they think it may not be there because something happens, the system fails, or two, they think we're going to restrict it. So if somebody could tell them that, we guarantee that your money is going to be there, it would be fine. But I don't have enough tools in my tool belt to be able to make such a guarantee. So I can't do that myself. But if the city could do that, that would be helpful.
Any other questions about drop withdrawals?
An overriding point from sitting as the actuary member of the Pension Review Board is that the Pension Review Board, I think, we can say that the plan doesn't have an adequate financing arrangement. It's not only doesn't have one, it's the most inadequate by far of any of the plans that we deal with. So that we're dealing with a very serious issue here. And you mentioned levers. I've thought of levers, but they're my thoughts. They're not the board's thought. The board, we haven't talked about it, and so it'd be premature for me to do that. I think without first having discussion with the board, and I see that coming at another time than right now to just spring on other board members any thoughts I have. I'll just generalize and say I think we need. It's going to take a lot more than I'm hearing today to solve this problem in terms of change. And so, and our job is to give advice and opinion on what those changes might be. But that's wearing the hat of one. That's my view. But that's for the whole, our board to need to think about whether we want to and how much we ought to do. But it's a real serious problem, and I know this is, you've heard that a lot. I think it means that you've got to look hard at some changes that nobody wants to look at right now.
That board decision was a unanimous decision, by the way. We had council, and it was a unanimous decision after a lot of deliberation. So we acted based on the best information that we had, unanimously. Yeah.
Thank you. So on the next slide, I just talked to you a little bit about how we manage the liquidity. There's certain things I can't go into just because they relate to private assets, but basically we're looking at these drop requests every day. We have a member that's, real-time updating things as they come in, and, we're monitoring them on a daily basis. We continue to review our cash flow on a weekly basis. We know the time that it takes to liquidate the public assets. We have an estimate of the time that it takes to liquidate private assets. Obviously, some vacant land's going to take a lot longer than some piece of private equity. So we've got those estimates. We work with our investment consultant on liquidation and rebalancing considerations, and we will take the steps necessary in a timely fashion to make sure that we're liquidating private assets when and if necessary to try to maximize the value of those. We don't want to take haircuts if we don't have to take haircuts. So if something has a long runway and we think we're going to need it, we're going to start it early. Those kinds of things. It's difficult to project, as you can see, because a lot of this is out of our control, but we've got a lot of people working on it on a daily basis. We talked about how the board's actions have been effective so far, but every time there's a news story or something like that, we worry that people are going to come in, and I think some people want those numbers to go up for whatever reason. So, Mr. Mays, what you said is what these changes here, whether it's just how we're handling the drop or all of the changes, aren't enough, and we totally agree with that. These aren't enough to save the plan. But what we tried to do is, since we believe there is a legal obligation from the city, and we feel like we are jointly responsible to solve this plan, the members came forward with a plan that they felt still provided a reasonable benefit to the members. When we came forward with the plan on August 11th, the reductions that they made and the increased contributions close 55% of the contribution rate gap. Now, that's over a 40-year period. But now, because of the increase in the drop withdrawals, it's only covering about 43% of the funding gap. The changes that we made extended our date to insolvency by 11 years. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that really is a 78% increase in life in our fund right now. However, now with the drop withdrawals, we're back to 2030. We've lost all the ground that these plan amendments are going to make up. If these don't get approved, we're going to lose another 3 years, basically. And that's assuming worst case. The way we calculated that is assuming all of the drop money runs out next year. We just wanted to see kind of worst case. So, we've said it before, we're telling our members, unlike in the past, and this is kind of funny in the meetings, where they said, well, you said we do these changes and it solves everything. Well, good news, I'm telling you, you do these changes, it's not solving everything. So, we're telling our members, you do these changes, we still have a problem. We can't do it on our own and still provide a reasonable benefit that the city can hire people with. The other problem we have is 98% of our liability right now relates to Tier 1 people that have been here at least 10 years, so half their benefit is set, or retirees, which all their benefit is set. So we don't have a lot of options really going forward. I talked about, we do believe there's a joint responsibility with the city. They have been part of the board this whole time. I know the city feels differently than that, but we think it's part of the Constitution that they do it.
And one thing I want to interject in terms of what Mayor Rawlings said, he doesn't think there is some responsibility. I know everybody is somewhat familiar with the constitutional provision, but I want to refresh the board's memory. What the constitutional provision provided was the ability of cities to opt out of that provision. And the city council,
Clarification. What constitution are we talking about?
the Texas Constitution, Article 16, Section 66, and it provided the opportunity for cities to opt out. And the city of Houston chose to opt out, and a few others that I don't recall exactly, Galveston, I believe, and maybe one or two others, had votes. The provision provided for a vote of the citizens to opt out. Well, the city council and the mayor was not a part of the governing body then, and nor was any other sitting council member. The city chose not to put up for a vote of the citizens of Dallas the option to opt out of that constitutional provision. So I am left scratching my head a little at the city's consistent position with respect to that. I think the other thing I find interesting is an exchange that occurred back last December at a city council meeting where the city attorney said that the city's municipal plan was covered by the constitutional provision, but our plan was not, which again, I'm not sure what the basis for that statement by the city attorney was, but I think the pension system, the police and fire pension system, clearly finds that there's no basis for a difference between the two systems. So,
Yeah, if I may, I think this discussion here, of course, has deep implications for how a solution is developed. What I will say is I'm somewhat disappointed at the level of discourse that I'm hearing, that we seem to be at a stalemate and at a place where more of the discussion is around blame than around taking responsibility and moving forward. I think that it's correct to say that the changes that are up for a vote of the members will do very little to affect the short-term or the long-term problem that the plan faces. I think while it is a positive step and it represents some sacrifice from members, the scale of this problem is so large that this does not put much of a dent at all in it. In fact, the 55 and 43% numbers are meant to, I believe, overstate the impact that this will have on the actual plan's fiscal health, given that the plan will run out of money here in 2030. That's a big deal. And I would hope that both the city and the plan can move beyond this assigning of blame and the stalemate that appears to be in place to actually solving this very large problem that will have direct implications, as the mayor has said, not only for workers, but the city as a whole, the city's fiscal health, the economy of the city, and the economy of the state.
one other comment following up on what you said. I happened to sit in and listen in Arlington to the discussion you had where you were talking to the Texas House Committee on pensions. And I encourage you to continue to work with them. I know they're wanting to work with you, but they're not. They're saying they're not really a source of money for you. But keep them in mind as you try to think through how can we move beyond where we are now. Because I share the chairman's comment. I'm not optimistic that what both sides are doing today it's a long way from sufficient.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Ms. Gottschalk, the mayor mentioned a pending lawsuit that could double your unfunded liability.
Sorry, Mr. Brenner, that I believe is a lawsuit just involving the city and its workers, not involving the pension plan.
Different matter.
Oh,
Separate.
okay, sorry.
Although that lawsuit could impact the pension fund, and that's one of the things we are trying to change as one of our ballot questions is, it's the city's pay referendum, and if the city were to lose that, and we have to now pay higher payments based on their salary going up, that would have a devastating effect for the city. And I really would like to, and we clearly haven't done a very good job about this, I think we are working very well with the city. We meet all the time. I think we have a very good working relationship. I think the problem that we have, frankly, is timing. I mean, the city has the pay referendum hanging over their head, and they have us. And basically, I think they need some time to get to the legislative session to fix one or both of those things. Whereas I want to fix this now because at least on the member side, to get this piece fixed so I stop paying the higher interest rates and I can start making some headway. So I think we are trying to work together. I think we do still have some differences on where we believe legal responsibility lies, but I believe the city clearly supports their police and fire, and I think you have to have police and fire. They have to have a bond rating. It has to work out. I mean, there's no other choice. These members don't have Social Security, so it will work out. How we get there, might be a bumpy road, I don't know, but everybody wants the same goal in the end.
Do you find that under the Tier 3 that the city's having trouble attracting and retaining new fire and police officers?
Sam or the mayor? I hear that.
Mayor, you can join them at the table if you would like. And I would add a follow-on to that question. Certainly, Tier 3 is likely to have an effect, but I would also like to understand the relative effect of pay, the pay issue that you also mentioned.
We have underpaid younger officers for too long. We get them, we train them, and they move to Fort Worth or Plano, and we made a strategic imperative to raise their pay this year, and so we've done that, and we're going to get them more paid, and I think the rate of them leaving is going to be less. I believe we don't have a piece of research that would answer your question directly, but I believe that the pay impacts them more than the pension benefits at this point because of how young they are. They want a pension system, and they want it to be solid and working, but it's more the pay issue.
So you haven't found, to this point anyway, that they're acting whether to stay or to leave based on the condition of detention?
I have not heard that. I've met with a lot of police officers over the last couple of years, and it's the older ones that are concerned about the pension, younger ones are concerned about the pay.
Thank you.
I concur with that. Yeah.
So in looking at the governance structure of this plan and the changes that you have proposed, given the tools that you have, would you say that it's accurate to say that you don't necessarily have the tools at your fingertips today to really solve this problem?
I don't have appropriation of authority over the city of Dallas, so no, I don't have those tools. But we do have and always have had representatives from the city of Dallas on our board.
Were the representation numbers accurate that the mayor presented earlier? So the city has a minority of the board seats?
In the early years, they had 40% of the board, and then they had 43% of the board. Sorry, they had 43% of the board, and then they had 40% of the board, and then 2 retirees were added, and the city didn't object to that, and so now they have a third of the board. And in the last few years, excuse me for interrupting, those council trustees have made a big difference. I mean, they're a big part of why we've made the changes that we've made. So even though they are a minority, they could have stood up and
Has
waved
the
the
city
flag.
reviewed the governance changes that you have put into the plan amendments that are going to a vote of the members?
So we have had the city staff in all of our subcommittee meetings for basically a year, and we've had many conversations with AC and some with the mayor as well, and with the council trustees at the meeting. None of them have suggested any other ones or told us they didn't want the ones that we have in here.
I've told Sam that my points of view on governance. I've been very clear on that.
And does, Mayor, I believe from your earlier conversations, you believe legislative change is necessary. And Ms. Gottschalk, I believe that you think legislative, are you guys working together?
We want to. That's what we want. I think Kelly's right. I think the matter is timing on this, and it takes some time to deal with this. We do believe we have been jointly responsible, as Josh has said, and we have fulfilled that responsibility very clearly over the years, and continue to do that. It is set up to fail in the future. It was set up to fail in the beginning, and we need to change that.
Any other questions from our board?
Well, just in terms of working with the legislature, I know it puts you in a squeeze, but getting to the right people in the legislature, the right committees early, gives you a much better chance of progress than late. And so whatever you can do this fall or in January, as much, if you wait until March or April, things clog down. It gets hard to pass anything through the legislature.
Thank you.
And I will add here, as we kind of close this section of our agenda, I really appreciate that both of you came today and made presentations. I think this is a big problem for the city of Dallas, not only for the city of Dallas, though, but for the state of Texas as well. I will also add that part of our general duties as the Pension Review Board is to recommend policies, practices, and legislation to public retirement systems and appropriate governmental entities. So I would encourage you to view us as a partner in this. We want to help. We want to see this plan have long-term success. We want to see the public safety officers in Dallas have a plan that is there for them, not just tomorrow, but in the long term. And we can assist in numerous ways, either through our staff actuary, through board reviews, happy to assist in any way that we can as you work together to come up with a solution to this very big problem.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are going to move along to item number 5 on our agenda. Judge Cable, can you provide an update on the work of the Education and Research Committee?
Certainly. If I could call on Michelle Crane, Ms. Taylor as well.
Good morning. Currently, we are in the, first we're going to start off with a update on the PRB online training. Currently, we are in the final stages of putting all 7 courses up online. All 7 courses will be online before the end of November. Currently, we have benefits administration, risk management, ethics, governance, and we are proud to have actuarial matters actually come up this week. We will have investments and fiduciary matters out soon. They are currently out for expert review, and then we'll be doing final reviews and then putting them up online as well.
I wanted to add a thank you to Mark Fenlaw for providing very helpful and thoughtful comments to our actuarial matters course that we released yesterday. Thank you to Mark.
Can you just remind us really quickly what our requirement was under the law?
Sure. So with regards to providing online training, this was a requirement added to our law in 2013 through our Sunset Bill as well as HB 13, which created the entire trustee and administrator training program, which we now call MET, Minimum Educational Training Program. So as you know, part of that were requirements for trustees and administrators to complete training, requirements for the Pension Review Board to track their compliance with it, and then in terms of online training, for us to provide training that would help be more accessible to trustees and administrators who may not be able to travel to receive that training in person. So in addition to accrediting sponsors of conferences and other types of education, as you know, we've taken that charge to mean putting out a course in each of the 7 core content areas that our board adopted.
Okay, next we're going to move on to MET compliance reporting, and this is the first time that we're reporting MET compliance. If you turn to tab 3, we have an update. The report I'm going to give you today details compliance for the MET reporting requirements. These numbers do not reflect whether systems are compliant with the training requirements of the MET program, only whether they have submitted the required reports. We will publish the first report of the trustees and administrators' compliance with the MET training in our biannual report to the legislature at the end of this month. We will be sending out a report with the collected information to the systems for them to review in the next week. I will take a moment to walk you through the new compliance reports. Okay, if you look at the first chart, it shows the compliance numbers for only the PRB 150, which is the minimum education registration form. This form contains information on trustees and system administrators, including their term dates, and is necessary for us to use to be able to determine who is subject to the training requirements. As of today, there is only one system that is missing only its PRB 150. The second chart shows compliance numbers for only the PRB 2000, which is the form systems use to report their trustees and administrators' training hours. There are currently 21 systems who are not compliant with the requirements. These systems will need to get their forms into us as soon as they can if they want to have any of their training that has been completed since February reflected in our MET compliance report to the legislature. The third chart shows the compliance for both the PRB 2000 and the PRB 150. This means that the systems have not turned in either of the forms. Currently, there are 2 that have not done this, and if we do not receive anything from them, these systems, we will have to indicate no information provided in our MET compliance report to the legislature. A final little note on that, Dallas County Hospital District Retirement Income Plan has submitted both their PRB 150 and 2000 in the past week and have been taken off that list. Finally, the fourth chart shows the number of systems that are over 60 days non-compliant for the PRB 2000. A list of non-compliant systems can be found on the following page entitled Non-Compliant Systems Over 60 Days. And of course, Dallas has been taken off. The Dallas County Hospital has been taken off that list.
As probably every time that you come up here and speak, I always have to mention what a monumental task this has been to put this together with minimal resources given to do so, and I appreciate y'all's input. Thank you. Questions? that.
Yeah, just one question. So you gave a summary of what our requirement of the law is. Are we on track to meet our requirement in the time specified?
We are, Chair McGee. So we, in terms of creating online courses so the trustees and administrators can take this training from the convenience of their home or desk, we will have all 7 courses online by the end of this month, which will allow them and as you know, we've been publishing them all along since the beginning of this year, so they have the ability to be taking those courses as we go. There are 2 left, and we will have them done by the end of this month, leaving them 1 month to complete those last remaining 2 remaining courses.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for always making me look good.
Thank you, Judge Cable.
If I could, 2 observations. One, if somebody wanted to create this set of courses, we could easily have spent hundreds of thousands, if not well over $1 million to have a consultant do it. We should understand that that's what staff has done in terms of developing this coursework. Secondly, are we getting any feedback with regard to the courses from the people who are taking it?
Thank you. We have surveys at the end of each course, actively trying to solicit input on the quality of the education. So far, those have been very positive. We sometimes receive feedback which is not as positive, and of course use that constructively to try to improve the courses or the content within, but we have had some very positive comments, and in fact, an executive director of one of the systems personally reached out to tell us that he thought our courses were very high quality, and we really appreciated that.
Well, since you said so, is there an opportunity to monetize this, sell it to other states? Wasn't a joke. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that concludes item number 5 on our agenda. Thank you for the update, Judge Cable, on the work of the Education and Research Committee.
Thank you very much.
Next, we'll turn to item number 6, Mr. May, for an update on the work of the Actuarial Committee.
And I, in turn, will ask our staff actuary, Kenny Hairball, to come up to discuss this. And also within this general topic of number 6, Actuarial Committee, we have, I believe, Ashley Rendon could come on up and be ready to talk when we get to that point.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members. I appreciate the time to go through this material with you. The first item I would like to cover is behind tab 4A. Those are our actuarial evaluation reports. I would like to point out that we have 3 reports this time around. These are a new format as compared to the prior board meetings. These were approved by the board at the August 4th board meeting, and we've now updated all of our reports to include current information. Just as a quick summary of what we have here, the actuarial evaluation report is the first one. It does not contain any information that you have not seen before in a prior report. We have consolidated some of the prior actuarial evaluation report and the supplemental report that previously existed into this particular report. It continues to be sorted by effective amortization period. I would like to just take a couple of minutes to talk about what's going on in the report. As you can see by looking at page 4, where we have some summary information, the AVA continues to be higher than market value of assets, which indicates that we are continuing to defer investment losses into the future as the plans incorporate those into their actual value of assets. We'll see those numbers come up, and as asset values or as the markets improve and the plans have investment gains, we'll see those two come together and possibly change sides. While it does appear that from the prior funded ratio column to the current funded ratio column that funded ratio has decreased slightly. If you look at amortization periods, there is a trend, a downward trend on amortization periods. Most of them, in general, are shortening. There are some plans going in the opposite direction, obviously, but overall, we appear to be moving in a positive direction with respect to amortization periods.
Sorry, Kenny, am I reading this correctly, that the difference between market value and actuarial value right now is $10 billion?
Yes, I believe that's it.
So there are $10 billion of outstanding losses that have not been realized in the actuarial value of assets of pension plans in Texas?
That's correct. So I would like to make one note about the headers. The actuarial committee noted that we may not be consistent in reporting all of our amortization periods for all of our plans. So we are working with plans who are currently using an open amortization period for calculating their annual contribution. We previously had been reporting them at whatever that amortization period was. We're working with them to calculate an effective amortization period, which would identify the expected period it would take to actually fund their unfunded accrued liability. If no one has any questions about the AV report, I'll move on to the supplemental report. The supplemental report is primarily information that has been reported in the plan's annual financial reports under the GASB 67 reporting requirements. We have definitions of all of the various terms, as most of them are relatively new. They're all defined in GASB 67 and GASB 68. I guess I will point out that 67 is specific to the pension plans. GASB 68 is the reporting requirements for the governmental entities as opposed to the plans themselves. There are some slight differences in what is required to be reported, but the calculations are approximately the same. There are a couple of plans that we currently report that are not subject to GASB 67 reporting requirements. It's based on the type of plan they are. Two of the statewide plans, actually 3 of the statewide plans, are not subject to GASB 67 reporting requirements. One of them is the Judicial Retirement System of Texas. That's because it's an unfunded plan, so it's not subject to the new reporting requirements. 2 of our statewide plans, TCDRS and TMRS, are agent multi-employer plans, which means that they are not subject to the same requirements. They are subject to GASB 67, but there are a number of the reporting requirements that individual systems are required to report that they're not subject to. So we have a handful of NAs through here that and have identified which plans are not subject to it. There are also some NAs in here because some plans do not report covered payroll. So as was requested, we are reporting the majority of this information. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the next one. So it looks like, yeah, no, that covers this particular report. There are some footnotes on the 10-year return because there are discrepancies. The 10-year return is reported on our PRB 2000. There are some discrepancies with the information that has been provided. So we've kind of identified where the differences might occur and what those differences are. In particular, there's some plans that haven't been in existence for 10 years, and so we wanted to make sure that it was clear that the information being reported is less than 10 years.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Kenny.
Yep.
Do you recall, with regard to the AV supplemental report, does GASB 67 require the disclosure of the funded ratio that you've included in this report? Or is that a figure that we're calculating?
It is a figure that we're calculating. The majority of the reports include that. I could not tell you off the top of my head if it's specifically required or not, but in the majority of the plans, when they identify their total pension liability and their net pension liability, they indicate what the funded ratio is.
Thank you. I would just observe that The GASB 67 is intended to be an accounting number, not a funding number, and having a funded ratio to reflect an accounting position really is a bit of a misnomer, so I would take that value with a grain of salt. Thank you.
We could consider renaming that column, although we don't have much space there. We could just say that it is the ratio between the net pension liability and the total pension liability. We could think about renaming it, just taking the word funding out of that, funded out of that. We represent the funded ratio, I believe, over on the main AV report,
That's correct, yes.
so it might be valuable to do that.
Okay.
I agree. I think that change ought to be made.
The 10-year return, this is net, and it is average annual return.
I would have to defer to a different, to other staff members. Anu might know how specifically it's calculated.
This is an average 10-year return, and these are, yes, net numbers. However, not all systems provide net returns. They may provide gross, and we have noted where we do not have net information for those systems.
Gotcha.
Is that to say that we're saying net of investment expenses?
Net of investments, some systems also clarify that those net may be net of administrative and investments. So there could be systems in here that are reporting a net of both investment and administrative expenses.
The PRB 1000 is where this number is reported, is that correct?
Yes.
It would be useful to me to understand what the definition of that is on the PRB 1000, and we might consider more tightly defining what we mean by return if it is not tightly defined there. I think that if there's wiggle room around what this is net of, whether it's investment and admin, just investment, or net of whatever they consider, whatever they want to put net out, then I think we should consider tightening it a little bit. And my question was around whether this is the compound average annual return here and
So
not just
arithmetic versus geometric. I believe it's arithmetic, yes.
Okay.
So finally, we have our contribution report. The contribution report is primarily reported on a percent of payroll basis. So this was the report I meant to refer to when I said that some plans do not report a covered payroll. So we have identified a good portion of their information in NA, or is not applicable. We have, however, still identified whether their contribution type is actuarial versus fixed, as well as attempted to determine the percentage of their recommended contribution that they're actually contributing. So I'll walk through some of the information quickly to give you an idea of what we're looking at and how things might differ from how the systems might report them themselves. So for a lot of particularly fixed-rate plans, there is no clear link between their funding valuation and the fiscal year for which the contribution is being made. That's because there's not a need to. So for an actuarially determined contribution, there tends to be a bit clearer link. So in those particular cases, if there is no clear link, we have chosen to use the the funding valuation that begins on or before the fiscal year to determine the total normal cost and the employer normal cost amortization payment, that portion, where the recommended contribution is coming from. Otherwise, if there is a clear link between what the system says or the actuary says they're calculating the fiscal year that they're calculating the contribution for, we've attempted to compare those two so it's a little bit clearer. Item, let's see here, column F is column E is the employer recommended contribution. This is intended to be in conjunction with the 30-year or less contribution that is required to be reported under Section 802-101A. And I wanted to point out specifically the or less because there are a number of plans that if their current amortization period or their actuarially determined contribution is based on a period that is less than 30 years, that's the number that is going in here. So there are a number of plans who are contributing 100% of their recommended contribution, but that recommended contribution could be based on a 10-year amortization period or an 11-year amortization period. So there could be, I guess it may not look as good as it might otherwise if this was strictly a 30-year contribution. And lastly, I did want to point out that some of the percentages may vary slightly from what is actually reported by the system in their actuarial evaluation reports. We are attempting to standardize numbers that are reported by 93 systems that could be reported possibly in 93 different ways. So there are some timing differences between how the actuary may be calculating their contribution and how we're recording it. There also could be some differences between whether the dollar contribution that is reported in the annual financial statement is based on actual covered payroll, but we don't have access to that particular number, so it may be slightly different from that respect as well. So if there are any questions about the reports and
We appreciate your
information,
attention to detail and accuracy.
We
won't hold
my
you to
best to represent actuaries as
This is very helpful. One
qualified.
point of clarity, though, this is contributions from the plan sponsor to the plan, not contributions from the plan.
These are contributions to the plan as reported in the plan's annual financial statements. So presumably the majority of those are coming from the employees as well as the plan sponsors. So if there aren't any questions on the reports, I will move on to tab B.
I just have one question before we move on about a particular system, not necessarily about the reports. So I see on the actuarial valuation report, so the first report we looked at, that the top two plans are the Dallas Employee Retirement Fund and the Dallas Police and Fire combined system. So we didn't talk at all whenever we had Dallas in here about the Employee Retirement Fund. It looks as if the contributions that they're receiving from the city are not sufficient to ever amortize their current unfunded liability. Should we be concerned about this plan? I remain surprised at how quickly the situation deteriorated with the Dallas plan, and I think that this board should be more vigilant and should help both the sponsor and the plan watch for situations that could deteriorate like that. I think that now there are not many good solutions, and I just want to understand the extent to which we think that the Dallas Employee Retirement Plan might cause additional stress for the city or might find itself in a difficult financial situation.
I don't have details on that particular fund in front of me at the moment, but we can certainly look into that and provide further comments at a future date.
I think you heard some of the same discussion I knew at the meeting in Arlington. I think that a very general statement, it's not nearly as severe an issue as the fire and police in Dallas. The Muni plan is in much better shape.
I would agree. However, like Josh pointed out, the contribution arrangement for Dallas ERF is concerning. Their funded ratio, just looking at Dallas Police and Fire and Dallas ERF's funded ratio is in a decent shape. However, so they have a little bit more time than Dallas Police and Fire, relatively speaking. They are currently, Dallas ERF is currently proposing benefit changes that we would be reviewing as part of their funding soundness restoration plan to determine whether or not those changes would get them to where they should be as far as the contribution arrangement concerns are.
Well, judging from the AV supplemental report, Dallas ERF is using a discount rate that implies that they've got a run-out date.
They do. They are projecting a depletion date under the GASB disclosures. That's correct.
in looking at the contribution report, it looks as if that plan is only receiving 83% of the contribution that would be necessary to pay off its current unfunded liability over a 30-year period. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, that's their actually determined contributions, or their recommended contribution is going to be based on 30 years. I believe part of their funding arrangement is that a portion of the contribution that they calculate each year goes to pay off pension obligation bonds that they have, and their total contribution to the plan as well as to pay off the pension obligation bonds is currently capped. And I think that might be part of the issue that is...
Anu, can you say a little bit more about the plan change? You don't have to go into detail about the plan changes, but these plan changes that are proposed, what's the logistics going forward for those?
So Dallas CRF is in city code. For them to make these plan changes, they have to go to the city voters and get an approval, and their proposed changes would be on the ballot on November 8th. If those changes go through, they would essentially be instituting a new, cheaper tier for future employees, is what my understanding is. They are not proposing any other contribution rate or any other plan provision changes other than adding a new tier.
I see. So it sounds as if they have a very different governance structure than the Dallas Police and Fire Plan.
That's correct.
You don't have to wait on the legislature to enact those changes? Okay.
That's correct.
Have we seen what the proposed changes are, or seen an actuarial scoring of those changes?
We have had an opportunity to discuss the changes with the executive director, but we have not done our own analysis of those changes. I believe part of that did include some projections done by their own actuary that indicated that based on the changes that they were planning on making, the contribution arrangement would be sufficient to fund the plan, and they would no longer be having a depletion date and running out of money. But again, I don't know much more than that off the top of my head.
How quickly, so these plan changes would go to voters here in November, how quickly would we know, how much of a lag would there be if these are approved? Would we know what the impact on, let's say, the effective amortization period will be? We would have to wait on their actuarial valuation, or CAFR, in the subsequent fiscal year?
We could do some of our own analysis, look at the information they have provided, and get back to you on what our thoughts are.
I think it would be valuable. I'm sure that we'll want to monitor the situation with the Dallas Police and Fire Plan. I think it would be valuable also to get an update at our next meeting that includes information on the employee retirement fund there.
Yes.
All right, so if there are no more questions on the main reports, I'll direct your attention to tab B, where we have some additional changes that have been recommended by the Actuarial Committee to the primary actuarial evaluation report. So we put together a list of plans and their current assumed long-term rate of return, and grouped them in version 1, essentially in 50 basis point spreads, starting from 7% or less, and then going up to 8% or greater. We do have one data point specifically at 8% because of the quantity of plans that are at that point. This version 1 is the version that was approved by the Actuarial Committee to bring to the full board and recommended to the full board. We also presented version 2, which is immediately following it, which is very similar. We split the plans by quartile, their discount rates by quartile, which ultimately resulted in essentially the same splits and very close numbers. So I believe the committee decided to just go with the version 1. The way in which this would be incorporated into our existing reports would be on the the primary actuarial evaluation report. We would simply be color coding the assumed rate of return. Let's see what the, I believe we call it discount rate on the actuarial evaluation report. So we would be color coding the discount rate based on where it fell within the range. We also have a couple of statistics that we would be adding to the end of the report, which includes the liability-weighted mean and median, as well as the mean and standard deviation based on the arithmetic average. So, if there aren't any questions, I believe there might be a motion to need a motion to approve
This
this.
is an action item.
Can I say one thing about the report before we go there? Thank you for putting it together. I would highlight that, so down at the very bottom of report number 1, there's the liability weighted median. That is 8%. Current liability weighted median of all public plans is around 7.6-ish. And so the fact that this number is so much above the national liability weighted median just means that our plans have substantially more funding risk than plans nationally. And that, while it is not cause for alarm, it should be cause for concern that we're taking on additional funding risk. And I think that kind of highlights the importance of that funding report that we saw just previous to be vigilant and make sure that plans are receiving adequate annual contributions that are in full.
I might point out that TRS of Texas, I think, alone comprises about 1/2 or more of all of the liabilities in the state, and so they're weighting that weight a lot. And if they were to change by 25 basis points, they would have a material change on that figure alone. So I guess we should be careful to not characterize the whole state of state pension plans in the state because of the outsized weight that TRS has got. And for what it's worth, the last I heard from TRS of Texas is that they feel confident in their assumed rate of return.
And they're 8% rate of return?
That's correct.
I would add just one statement, so I fully agree with that. There is variation here. It is right to point out that TRS has substantial weight here because of the size of their liabilities. I would also add, though, regardless of the plan and their management and their board's confidence in their ability to get that rate of return, regardless of that fact that they have confidence, the higher the rate of return, the more funding risk there is. And so they're taking on more funding risk than the average plan in the United States, substantially more.
So I would move the Actuarial Committee's recommended version 1 as the version of these reports that the board would accept as a regular presentation.
Second.
Ken, well, we need...
No, I didn't know if y'all needed to vote, or that was enough. Is that?
No, we need to vote. So the chair entertains the motion to approve additional changes to the actuary evaluation report, including the discount rate groupings, and publish the updated report for the next board meeting. That motion has been moved. I need a second.
I'll second.
The motion has been moved and seconded to approve additional changes to the actuarial evaluation report, including discount rate groupings, and publish the updated report for the next board meeting. Anybody have any additional discussion on this item?
Yeah, I do have a bit of discussion. As we look forward, the actuarial profession is developing. It's in draft form now and should be final sometime next year. But this will be a specific discussion of risk and the importance of paying attention to risk. And perhaps if we had been paying more attention to risk in the past, we would have had some better outcomes in some instances. I'll keep the board advised when that becomes final.
Thank you, Mr. May. Any other board discussion of this motion? So the motion has been made and seconded to approve additional changes to the actuarial evaluation report, including discount rate groupings, and publish the updated report for the next board meeting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Mr. May, you can continue.
All right, this is for Kenny also.
Yes. The next PRB guidelines for actuarial soundness and update on the actuarial.
Okay. Kenny, you want to take that?
Sure. So behind tabs 4C, I will be discussing both tabs 4C and 4D concurrently, so I'd like to give a quick overview of what is contained behind those tabs. So the staff was tasked with putting together a survey to survey the plans as well as other interested parties with respect to possible changes to the PRB guidelines. We have included a copy of that survey, which went out on August 9th. Immediately following that, the copy of the survey that went out is a summary of the survey that was, the responses that were received, as well as the September 15 Actuarial Committee discussion over those responses and the board or the committee action items requested of the staff. Those action items resulted in the updated PRB guidelines, or some changes to the PRB guidelines, which appear behind tab D. So in addition to the discussion, or following the discussion, we have the full comments that were provided by all of the survey respondents, in addition to 12 additional letters that we have received in the past 2 weeks, specifically for this board meeting. One of them is from TMRS, as well as TMRS's consulting actuary. I believe they're here to actually discuss that, so I won't go into detail as to what's in that. In addition, the other 11 letters came from John Kreider and other concerned parties, funds, actuaries, in support of the information contained in TMRS's letter, as well as a primary recommendation of keeping the guidelines as is. So I'd like to spend a few minutes going through the survey, as well as the responses and the committee discussion last month. I guess it was a month and a half ago now, so
Can
September.
you quickly just provide an overview of what the process looked like before you kind of go into the blow-by-blow?
Of the survey and the...
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so so I don't have all the details in my head at the moment, so give me one quick second. I know if you remember.
So members, just to quickly remind you, at the August 4th board meeting, the members approved the various topics recommended for updating our guidelines. Based on those topics, we created the survey questions, sent the survey out to our systems as well as their actuaries, and behind tab 4C, the second document, which is the summary of the survey results as well as the committee discussion, the topics that were included in the survey questions were relating to amortization period, discount rate, asset smoothing, actuarial experience studies, actuarial cost methods, and there were some other miscellaneous questions with regards to updating the title of the guidelines, as well as any comments that the systems had on different needs of mature plans. We provided, I believe, 3 to 4 weeks for systems to send in their responses. The actuarial committee met on September 15th to review those responses and come up with recommendations after considering the responses and deliberating over the recommended language based on those various topics. The staff worked on creating the draft language for the guidelines based on public comments as well as committee recommendation, and the document that we have presented before you are again the recommendations from the actuarial committee for you to consider today. And I would also quickly give you the next steps moving forward. After the board discussion regarding those recommended changes to the guidelines, the staff will then go back and develop the final recommended changes to the guidelines, solicit another round of public comments based on those recommended changes. The actuarial committee is again going to meet on December 15th to consider the survey comments that we receive on the exposure draft. And then finally, the full board will meet again in January to adopt those changes.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate that. So the first topic that was covered in the survey was amortization period, and there was one question basically asking anyone about the belief regarding an appropriate target range or suggested maximum boundary, and whether we should, what recommendations the PRB should be incorporating. The overwhelming majority, the majority of the plans felt that the current 40 years was a little bit too high and possibly out of current actuarial best practice, and believed a lowering of that would be appropriate.
Would you go as far as saying that everybody agreed on that was the closest thing to a total agreement?
On that, but no, I don't. Not from the responses from I think the committee discussion, that would be true, but there were a number of plans that have indicated, or a number of responses that indicated that they felt that it was best to just keep the guidelines as is.
I see. Okay.
But it was there were approximately 9 of the original 20 responses that indicated that it would be appropriate to lower it, and they all provided ranges between 20 to 35 years. The TMRS letter agreed with lowering that. However, there were 6. There were 2 that didn't respond, 6 that indicated that they felt that we shouldn't be making any adjustments, and I believe that the 11 letters that came in within the last 2 weeks primarily stated that they felt the guidelines shouldn't be changed at all.
Sorry, those 11 letters, the 11 letters are from Telfra Systems, so they are largely from Telfra Systems, or from?
That is a good question. They've all been provided at the end of this particular section, and I have not identified specifically if they're all from Telfra Systems, but it's probably a...
My understanding is that most of them are from Telfra Systems, so are smaller systems for firefighters at small local jurisdictions. Is that accurate?
That's correct. We have 42 fire plans that are created under the Telfra statute, and I believe majority of these letters are from those 42 systems.
So the primary committee discussion, it appeared that all members of the committee agreed that 40 years was probably longer than was appropriate at this point in time. One person did suggest a maximum of 30 years, but after some discussion, the committee settled on a maximum of 25 years. In addition, when discussing the target range, there was a suggestion of 15 to 25 years, as well as a suggestion of 10 to 20 years. We did receive some public testimony. One individual felt that bringing the target range down too low would have some issues with respect to contribution volatility, that the closer you get to a zero-year amortization period, it can increase the expected contribution volatility. And then one individual specifically from El Paso indicated that their existing statute specifically states 40 years, and that any change to the current guidelines would automatically make their specific statute out of, I guess, they would no longer be within the guidelines, the PRB guidelines, and they expressed some concern with that. So I will, as I said, I'll be kind of discussing some items behind C and D, so I'd like to direct your attention to the changes behind tab D. The action items requested by the committee were specific to item 4 of the guidelines. We have presented 3 options. One of them changes the current maximum from 40 to 25 years, as well as lowers the bottom of the range from 15 to 20, from 15 to 10, and we have made some minor adjustments to the language as well. From the board meeting option, or from the committee meeting, option 3 as well, where we lower the maximum, all 3 options lower the maximum from 40 to 25. Option 2 keeps the range at 15 to 25 years, which was suggested by Mr. Brainerd, and then option 3 lowers the range to 10 to 20 years. So I don't know if there are any specific questions on this particular item. Otherwise, I'll move on and we will address all of the changes at the very end. I plan on going through all of the discussion and all of the changes. I just wanted to direct your attention to each change as we discuss it, so it's a little bit clearer.
So under tab D, there is, the first document is current guidelines, second document is a red line of that with some options? Is that
That's correct.
accurate?
I apologize. So the red line, as a standard, anything that is being removed has a strike through. Anything that is being added is underlined. And since at least mine is not technically red.
And option 2, the only real substantive change is changing the period not to exceed to be 25 instead of 40.
That's correct. Everything else is the same. So moving on, item 2, or question 2 on in the survey was concerning discount rates and whether what advantages and disadvantages would exist if the PRB guidelines incorporated some sort of recommendation regarding developing the discount rate. In this particular case, I would say it was a near consensus of all respondents that the PRB should not be providing any information on or guidance on developing the discount rate. There were a couple of plans that were in favor of providing something. Primarily, one respondent indicated that the process should use should be forward-looking, and we should make a comment to that effect. However, one plan indicated that they thought it was impossible to provide a one-size-fits-all range or maximum. And then one additional suggestion was that in addition to requiring the actuary to indicate that they believe the discount rate is reasonable, but also require the fund to make that statement and any investment consultants who are involved to make that statement as well. The committee discussion centered around essentially that they wanted the staff to review current research regarding the development of discount rate and summarize that research and bring it to the board. I will get to that research in one second. We did receive a little bit of testimony indicating that the ASOPs are principles-based, and they specifically removed a recommendation which is known as the building block method in a recent update to ASOP 27. If you will turn to the document immediately following this summary, there is some discount rate research that we have put together. We have essentially taken a number of best practices and articles and opinions from developing discount rates in the U.S., including the actuarial standards of practice, as well as the recently superseded ASOP surrounding discount rates. We've included some information from the Government Accountability Office, GASB, as well as the SOA. In general, there are two recommended methods to developing a discount rate. One of them would be the building block method, which is essentially establishing real rates of return and for each asset class and adding them to an expected inflation to get an assumed rate of return. And generally, that would coincide with using the long-term assumed rate of return based on your existing assets. There are other approaches to using that, but that's generally the way it is used in U.S. public pension plans. The alternative, which is much more common in private pension plans or corporate plans, is using a yield curve of high-quality corporate bonds in order to develop a single discount rate over the expected horizon. There wasn't any specific action items with respect to the discount rate other than that, and there are no changes to, current changes to the guidelines with respect to that. If anyone has any questions. So the next topic was asset smoothing. We asked two separate questions on this, specifically about a range for asset smoothing as well as incorporating asset corridors. So asset smoothing could include saying you are not allowed to smooth for longer than, say, a 5-year period, and that would be the range that we're discussing. A corridor would be indicating that if your actuarial value of assets or your smooth value of assets varies from your market value of assets by a specified percentage, 20% is fairly common. So it can't be, if it ever falls below 80%, then your smooth value automatically defaults to 80%, or if it is ever more than 120%, it defaults to 120%. So those are the essential topics that are being discussed. The majority of the respondents in this, the majority of the respondents in this particular case also felt that it was unnecessary to address this particular topic in our guidelines. They felt that current ASOPs dealt with this sufficiently, and it wasn't necessary for us to include anything ourselves. After some committee discussion, there was some discussion on this particular topic. Some members commented on the fact that the combination of ASOPs as well as the Conference of Consulting Actuaries white paper, which was one of the source materials that was used for the survey, provided more than sufficient information. But after some discussion, it was agreed that we would incorporate a 5-year maximum smoothing period. We did not include anything regarding a corridor. So I would like to direct your attention to item 6, where there are changes in the guidelines. All of this is additional material. Items 6A through C are language that follows the current approach outlined in the actuarial standards of practice to help identify how an actuarial value of assets should be determined, or where the relationship with market value. Items D, there's options 1 and 2 for item D. One of them is the committee recommendation of 5 years. The staff also added an additional recommendation which mirrors the language that we have included for item 4, which includes a range as well as a maximum. The primary reason that this was recommended by the staff is the fact that funding methods should generally be viewed as a whole, and one of the things that the majority of our guidelines do is provide sufficient flexibility to incorporate each particular item and are not overly restrictive on one particular piece. So we felt it was appropriate to provide some additional flexibility in this particular item as well, so the plans had the ability to incorporate each piece as they saw fit and not to be overly restrictive. Now, if anyone has any questions about that specific.
a comment that as we move on, we'll have another meeting of the actuarial committee to move towards final. We need to remember that the systems have actuaries, and the actuaries are required to follow actuarial standards of practice. And where there's ambiguity, or where we're doing something that's beyond that, is an important area for to look into, but it's, I think, going to be important to remember and recognize that actuaries have standards of practice, and that, in my view, that's worked well and will continue to work well, and the actuaries have to follow those standards of practice. It's not a choice. So I'll be looking as one member for any duplication that would go beyond. That's something we don't really need to do, because we already have, because the actuaries have standards of practice they have to follow.
I will say that, just to continue on this point, I totally agree that actuaries have standards of practice they have to follow. I think that's certainly true. A lot of the time, the definition of those things, including you highlighted the change to the discount rate, where it was specified a building block approach was laid out, and now it is no longer laid out. The ASOPs are generally pretty pervasive in their definition of acceptable practice, and sometimes don't really provide all that much guidance. So in those areas, it might be useful, given our duties and role, to provide a little more guidance. And specifically, the actuaries generally work for the retirement plans, and I think part of our role is to ensure that contributions from the plan sponsor are adequate. And so even when something, duplication can, so we are duplicative in A through C here of what is in number 6 of what is included in the ASOP. Restating that as here could serve the purpose of informing the plan sponsor of what acceptable practice is. So what the actuaries are doing behind the scenes. I think that part of our role here is accountability for the plan sponsor, making adequate payments as well, and providing guidance around that.
And we certainly also need to, and we have, and we will get input from all the systems and their actuaries as we make these decisions.
So the 10 years versus just a 5-year recommendation, my understanding is that was primarily driven by feedback from a plan that currently uses 10 years, and that's TMRS, is that correct? The statewide municipal retirement plan?
I believe TMRS does use a 10-year average or smoothing period, but I would not say it was accurate that was the primary reason that staff chose to include this.
We're gonna hear from them later
Yes,
on,
yes,
correct?
they
So
will be coming. Yeah, they will be coming to
Great.
speak.
So it would be useful to have them speak to that.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so the next question covered the topic of actuarial experience studies, and we didn't. We asked about advantages and disadvantages, so in this particular case it wasn't as easy to identify specific numbers, but the primary advantages that the respondent indicated was improved accuracy, and that it would help plans respond more rapidly when experience does not match assumptions. Some of the disadvantages that were specifically mentioned were with respect to the cost of the experience study, particularly for smaller plans, and what would be required. One respondent mentioned that state law currently requires an actuarial experience study for plans with asset values in excess of $100 million, but it doesn't actually define what an experience study is. So they felt that it was appropriate to leave it undefined if we were going to include it. Another respondent specifically mentioned that The ASOPs currently require actuaries to attest to the reasonableness of all actuarial assumptions that are included in the actuarial evaluation report. So the actuaries may not be doing a specific experience study, but they are presumably looking at how actual experience is comparing to their assumptions and determining whether they're reasonable or not. In the committee discussion, it appeared that there was a general consensus that experience studies were useful, particularly for larger plans, but as well for smaller plans. During the discussion that included public testimony, one of the, or actually a couple of the individuals that were there were concerned that the actual experience would not be credible, and so it would simply be an additional cost for small plans, which is the fact that very little occurs on the small plans would indicate that the information isn't sufficiently credible to provide any value. The ultimate decision was to recommend that plans measure, monitor, and report the actuarial experience at least once every 5 years, and there was not any asset value attached to that. So I would direct your attention to the new item 8 in the redlined guidelines, which is where the statement is pension systems should monitor, review, and report the impact of actual plan experience on actuarial assumptions at least once every 5 years. If there are no questions, the next two questions were specifically about actuarial cost methods. This was regarding whether the PRB should include any additional guidance regarding how they should be developed, or if we should list which ones meet our requirements. There is currently a statement that would be applicable to actuarial cost methods. Item 2 in our current guidelines it talks about the allocation of normal cost and the contributions, and that is a specific reference to how the cost method and how the normal cost is developed. The general, in this particular case as well, the overwhelming majority indicated that they felt that the current guidance was sufficient, that there wasn't a need for the PRB to include any language in the guidelines. The ultimate recommendation was not to include any additional guidance at this point. The committee did request that the staff research plans currently using a cost method known as the ultimate entry age normal method, and determining whether their normal costs and liabilities are being calculated appropriately. The staff did provide some research, we spoke to the plans, did some research on how they were calculating their ultimate entry age normal liabilities and their normal cost. We did not find any specific concerns, and therefore we haven't included anything in this particular packet or in the guidelines. The last 4 questions are the general section. I'm going to go through one at a time because they each cover different topics. The first was specific to whether we should change the title of the guidelines to reflect the funding responsibility of the plan sponsor, and we asked for some suggestions. Ultimately, the committee settled on changing the guideline, the name from Pension Review Board Guidelines for Actuarial Soundness to Pension Review Board Pension Funding Guidelines, just to reflect that actuarial soundness is not really a well-defined term. The next item was, again, talking about the funding responsibility of both the plan members and the governmental entity, and whether we should provide any specific guidance that touched on that topic. The ultimate recommendation was to discuss in the preamble the requirement of the plan sponsor as well as the employees to provide funding to the plan. Question 10 was specific to whether the plans should be, I wouldn't say required, but should be encouraged to fund based on an actuarially determined contribution rate. This particular plan did generate some discussion, as well as one attendee at the committee meeting felt that there were some specific advantages to having a fixed rate as an option. For budgeting purposes primarily. The majority of the respondents, I believe, didn't feel that it was necessary for the PRB to provide any additional guidance. Sorry, I'm taking a quick look at my notes to make sure I'm not misrepresenting what was said. Because we did ultimately, the committee did ultimately recommend an addition to the guidelines, so I'll point you to item 5. We have included 2 options for your consideration. They are essentially the same. Item 1 references the need for fixed-rate plans to maintain a contribution rate that does not exceed the 30 years as defined in current government code. And then the second one points back to the maximum amortization period of the amended guidelines and uses a 25-year period as opposed to the 30-year period. And lastly, question 11 was with respect to whether or not the guidelines should address anything specific for mature plans, and the majority of the respondents indicated that they did not feel it was necessary, and the committee had no recommendations with respect to that particular item. And that there were a couple of additional comments that were not specific to the question, so we had included a comment section at the very end of the survey. Some of the comments that we felt we should share were that the fact that primarily Guideline 4 of the current guidelines, which is with respect to the amortization period and the ability to adopt plan changes, should include other criteria. One recommended criteria was a funded ratio criteria. Some respondents requested some time to implement the changes so as not to make the guidelines effective immediately. And one respondent felt that the PRB's focus should be on reporting information in a transparent manner and in an easy-to-compare manner. If there are any questions, that covers the majority of the guideline changes and the discussion, I believe.
Thank you for a very thorough review.
Thank you.
So I think, Mr. May, where we are here is on item number 3. Is that where we are? We're going to have discussion of the actual draft language.
I'd like to suggest we hear from folks that want to comment.
Do you want to have a board discussion first? Just a quick board discussion to walk through it. Why don't we, Mr. May, why don't we have a quick board discussion of the red line, and then we can have people come up and provide comment
Okay.
before we do anything.
We're Okay, let's just have a discussion of the proposed draft language to update the PRB guidelines for actuarial soundness, and hear from any board members that have any comment on this.
I would just say that I really appreciate all the feedback we've received. It's been really great to hear from the plans, their actuaries, and the staff has provided great support on this. I am in agreement with the red line version that we see before us. I would like to thank Vice Chair Brainerd, who I apparently have been butchering his name from the dais, so I've got to apologize for that. Vice Chair Brainerd provided some draft language here in the preamble that accomplishes hopefully more clarity on what we're trying to do with these guidelines. So if we go through the options, just to kind of put my opinions on the table, I I agree with the comment that item number 4 around amortization period is the key item. I believe that I'm in full agreement with option number 2, Vice Chair Brainerd's recommendation. So that would change our not to exceed to 25, and then have the target range, the preferable target range, be between 15 and 25. So there's full alignment between the max, the range, and kind of the suggestion around benefit increases at the bottom. If we keep going, I think simpler is better on item number 5, and having it tied directly back to item number 4, so referencing the 25 years there. So option number 2 would be my preferred. On item number 6, I don't have strong preferences around including A through C to mirror ASOPs, but I think it might be valuable for plans to understand how assets are valued for, not plans, plan sponsors to understand how assets are valued in the pension plans that they sponsor. And I am fine with the staff suggestion of D, so max of 10, with 5 years being the preferable target. I have a slight preference for option number 1 that just specifies 5. I think that's more where a lot of the actuarial community is, but I understand that there are some differences around that, and we have one plan at least that is using 10 years, and we'll hear from them at the end. And then I'm also in full agreement with item number 8 as it is written. So just to kind of kick off the discussion, and we can kind of discuss item by item and then hear from people, or it would be very useful just to hear from the board what the thoughts are. I think the logistics of this are going to be, as Anu laid out, that we'll have a discussion here, hopefully decide on some guidance for the staff to finalize the language. We would provide finalized language to plans, solicit additional input on that finalized language, and then take action to potentially adopt at the next board meeting, which would be in January. So we're going to have another crack at this whenever we look at it in
Well,
January.
the actual committee will have another crack at it.
That's correct. Sorry, I left that out.
And then after that, it would come back here.
It would come back to the PRB
In
board, full
in-
board, for
in
any
January.
implementation. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I might make just a couple of comments, please. First, I would observe that I think right now there's not a whole lot of disagreement, at least from those from whom I've heard among the members of the Actuarial Committee. And for the benefit of everyone, perhaps, including myself, I think it's useful to keep in mind the sort of the overarching objectives of funding a pension plan here and establishing these guidelines. And these are somewhat competing objectives. One is to, of course, amortize the unfunded liability, get it paid off, but also while maintaining cost stability. And we achieve that in many cases in this state by having fixed rate plans, and then also achieving intergenerational equity. That means, of course, each generation roughly paying its share of the cost, all the while not being overly prescriptive, because these plans have got actuaries. We should not try to improve on the actuarial profession. They can do that on their own. And so we're trying to find the balance between those various objectives. And again, I think that we're pretty close in terms of the folks we've heard from so far. Thank you.
Is it painfully obvious to me that if we go from 40 to 25, that half of our plans will be out of compliance?
That is correct. Based on, in our AV report, we organized the report based on the amortization period threshold outlined in our guidelines. So that particular report would be updated, and close to more than half of our systems would not meet our guidelines as it stands today.
And apologize for my analogy, but wasn't 200 cholesterol a good mark, and then all of a sudden it was bad, and no one changed their ways and behavior? Is that not similar to what we're asking, with no recourse to make any changes to their behavior?
I think that your analogy is right, that we're trying to tighten up a standard that I think there was a lot of agreement that was a little too loose. And Again, I think compliance is a little stronger word than we have the authority to use. This is just guidance on funding. We're, as the preamble now says, we're trying to facilitate a discussion, foster communication between plans and their sponsors as they determine a reasonable approach for responsible funding. And I think that while this would affect the color coding on our AV reports, in my mind, so we heard from Dallas earlier today, Dallas Police and Fire Plan and the mayor. That's a situation where 2 years ago they were saying they were 75% funded, and they met our guidelines, and the situation has deteriorated very quickly there. That highlights to me the necessity of, I think we were somewhat negligent in not catching that a little bit earlier and getting better information. I don't know that this fixes it, but I think that as a board, I think that we should help plans and plan sponsors better understand what responsible funding is.
And by no means do I not think that that's a good idea. What I'm saying is, what's going to be done different now? Are we going to invite them sooner? Are we going to stick to the plan that we have in place so we don't get broadsided like that again?
I think that's an open question that this board is going to have to decide. So this is guidance on funding. What we do with this after we have made any decision that we're going to make around what our guidance is, I think is going to be subsequent to.
I just feel like the implications with all those new colors on our charts may have further implications on what we're considering here.
I think that, so Kenny mentioned in his presentation that we could also consider updating our guidelines, and then once we actually have that information, once we've made a decision around the guidelines, then we, in the course of our next couple of board meetings, actually decide how we would implement and when in our AV reports. I think that's a fine way to proceed. So say, here's our guidance, but we're going to wait to implement any reaction or change to our AV reports or anything else in our practices until the board has time to discuss how we should react to changes to the guidelines.
Thank y'all for y'all's work.
Well, and we will have more discussion at the December meeting of the actual committee. And in my own view, that anything in the area of 30, 25, 20, they're all reasonable. There's arguments for each, and like we also need to sort of follow what happens in the legislative process. This last legislature put in, or as I was a part of it, them putting it in, but we put in a 30-year, a cost based on a 30-year amortization. We also have the state and the teachers' systems that have a 31-year amortization period. So I can argue it either side, but we'll talk about it some more in December, whether it was 30, in my mind, is 30 better than 25. They're both fine, but I see some merit in 30 being the number.
I would also note something you just highlighted, which is current state law pertaining to different pension plans is a little bit messy on amortization. There are specific statutes laying out requirements for specific plans or groups of plans that are different all throughout state law. 40 is included in the FSRP, 30 is included in a different place. Some individual plans have their own specification, including TRFs. So this is guidance. This is not trying to impact that.
Maybe we all need to, including me, remember that these are guidance. This is guidance. These are guidelines. This is not law.
I understand guidelines. I would hope that we would have some purpose to accomplish something with this. And looking at the committee discussion, and it said that 25 years would allow the PRB to more effectively monitor systems that may be close to falling behind. I'm not sure how that would do that. I'm not sure what we're going to do other than just make people think that it's impossible to accomplish what we want them to accomplish, and so they're just going to ignore what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly valid concern. So in my mind, and I can only speak for myself, I am concerned about the velocity with which, if you are around 30, you can go to infinite. So it's just, it just picks up pace the further out you get. So if you're at 50, it's really easy to get to infinite. If you're at 30, it's easier to get to infinite than if you're at 25. I think by moving that guideline up, it will be easier and less painful for the plan sponsor, for the plan to respond, and we hopefully will avoid a situation where the Dallas situation, where a plan very quickly is at a place where there are no good options.
Has anyone looked, I mean, where plans are today with their prescribed contribution rates, maximum contribution rates? I mean, is it even feasible for some of these plans to work down to this target contribution rate? I mean, there's only a max, there's almost so much money that can be put in to the pension plans. And I'm just wondering if a plan's ability to meet these guidelines based on where they are today is even feasible.
Well, it's the plan sponsor that would need to meet the responsibility. So the reason to do this would be to better ensure that the plan is getting enough money to fully cover the benefit promises that it needs to pay out. And so if I'm looking at this, it's true that at current rates that we would have more than half of our plans beyond. So I've got 32 plans right now would be under this guideline. But there are 37 plans that are between 25 and 40 that are below our 40. And there are a bunch of them that are just above that 25. So I think it's reasonable to assume that unless there are significant challenges with those plans, that the plan sponsor could increase their contributions sufficiently to get back under that 25 over some period of time. I don't think that it would be, it gets more complicated once you get up to the 40, but we already think the 40 are a problem. The 40 and above are a problem. And in those places, they have fewer options available to them already. And so we're hoping, I am hoping that we highlight some funding sufficiency problems before it gets to a point where the options are very, very difficult.
Certainly one way to produce a lower amortization period is to raise the contribution, as you're describing. But another way, and I think the way that has historically happened more often than raising the contribution, is to have a fixed contribution rate, which we have many plans, maybe 75% of our plans are a fixed total rate, and you have favorable experience gradually over time that lowers the amortization period. This is what's happened historically. And so if you drop the amortization period to an evaluation to 25 years, and you say, well, 30 is okay, then they may give an increase in benefits to retirees, as an example. If the guideline said 25 and they said, well, we better honor the 25, they wouldn't make that benefit increase. They would wait for until they got an amortization period of 18, 20, 21.
Mr. May?
Yeah.
Just point of clarification, our current guidelines, actually in number 4, say that benefit increases should not be adopted if all plan changes being considered cause material increase in the amortization period and if the resulting amortization period exceeds 25. So we're already anchoring on 25 there in that guidance.
That's right.
In our current guidelines as adopted.
So are we going to develop a process or a procedure where when they reach that point, we're going to start to negotiate with each one of them, or 2/3 of them,
I don't think that we have a negotiation role. I mean, we don't negotiate with plans that are above 40 right now.
Yeah, that's not a good word, but we're going to start talking to them or asking them to come in or something like that.
That's what we used to do in the past. We used to review the plans based on our guidelines and request them to come before us if they were not meeting our guidelines.
Okay, well, it seems to me like there've been an awful lot of them that weren't meeting the guidelines that we never have asked to come in.
That's true.
I think that's an accurate statement.
And,
Yeah.
and we've talked, at least some of us have.
I'm not sure we're gonna ever have time. I'm sorry, Bob.
No, I hear your
I'm not sure
point.
that there's gonna ever be enough time to invite all those people in. But I'm having a hard time recognizing what we're gonna accomplish.
Well, so I guess that's more of an existential question about the value of having guidelines at all, and if you don't believe that current guidelines are useful, then I think it would be difficult for me to convince you that updated guidelines would be useful. I think the current guidelines are useful in that they provide an anchor for plans and plan sponsors to discuss what responsible funding policy is, and to hopefully better ensure that they're getting enough money into the plan to cover the full benefits costs. So I think they already serve that purpose, regardless of what this board does in terms of asking people to come in. I think that it's an open question as to how aggressive we want to get in highlighting what we view as potential problems or plans whose funding is out of compliance with the guidelines. I think that's an open question, but I think that leaving that aside, they still serve a function, and I think we see lots of evidence of the function that they serve in how much we see policy anchoring to guidelines, and guidelines being referenced in testimony that we receive, and in the interaction of plans with the surveys, and how much this matters to people.
I would, looking back over quite a few years, I think that the plans do pay attention to these guidelines, give some thought to them. That doesn't mean they always do anything.
Yeah, I know they do. I've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
I've been listening to you for a long time.
Right.
40 years or so.
So you might talk to some of your fellow or board members or the members of the Lubbock firefighters. I would encourage you to get their sense of this whole thing that's going on, that we're doing. But my sense of it would be they would say that it's been of some use to just have the...
It always has been. I know it has. And it's just that I'm not seeing where we're going to change anything.
To me, the value of these is for plans, which I think generally want to be appropriately funded, to be able to take to their plan sponsors and say, this is where we need to be. And if we get there, then you need to fund us appropriately. It's not a stick, and we don't have any teeth here. All we can do is suggest and listen. But it's a way to nudge plans in a direction that we think that they ought to be going.
And I agree with that. I think that 40 years is too far out. I'm thinking that 25 years is too far short.
Well,
what do you think about 30?
The expected
30 sounds good to me.
Robert, the expected typical life of a public employee, working life, is much shorter than 25 years. And if you do it shorter than 25 years, then you're basically shifting some of the costs over different generations. And so if we wanted to align with that standard, it would be less than 20 years. And so, again, we're trying to balance different objectives, including intergenerational equity, but also making some progress on paying off the unfunded liabilities. I think we should hear from people who want to speak.
Right, I agree.
Sure.
Thank you, Kenny. So we've got Jim Parrish, David Gavia, and Joe Newton that will come up and provide some testimony. Thank you all for coming.
Did anybody else from TMRS want to be a part of this?
We've got another chair.
We've got one more chair.
There's one more chair up there.
No more microphones, though.
There are a few people left in our office doing work.
Chairman McGee and the Pension Review Board, thank you so much for allowing us to speak this morning. My name is Jim Parrish. I'm Deputy City Manager for the City of Plano, and I also serve this year as the Chairman of the Texas Municipal Retirement System Board, that's TMRS. And this morning we have with us Joe Newton. He's our consulting actuary with GRS, and David Gavia, the Executive Director for TMRS. But this morning, I'm here today to represent myself, not the board or the City of Plano, neither of which have taken an official position on this issue. But I'd like to share with you my personal thoughts about the proposed actuarial guidelines that were recently discussed at your actuarial committee meeting and that are addressed in the letter from TMRS to this group. I think I have a unique perspective to offer compared to others. Before I served on the board, I was a member of the TMRS Advisory Committee, and before that I was an active supporter of TMRS for many years while employed at the City of Amarillo in the Finance Department. In all those capacities, I have watched TMRS undergo historic changes in the years since 2008. And I believe my experience with both watching and participating in the improvement of a retirement system may be of some assistance to you in your efforts here. Texas has a long tradition of effectively monitoring its public retirement programs, and I think the Pension Review Board and the legislative oversight provided by the Pensions Committee in the House and the State Affairs Committee in the Senate have been instrumental in minimizing the problems with our state public retirement systems when compared to those with other states. For TMRS in particular, the balance between the state establishing a benefit framework and a funding mandate that allows participating municipalities to provide a benefit based on their specific needs and on what is affordable to them has been a key success for our cities. This design allows them to attract a superior workforce while having a significant control over the cost of their benefits. While serving on the board level, I have to say that providing flexibility for system trustees and fiduciaries to make decisions that affect system funding is extremely important to me. For TMRS, this is one of our greatest strengths. Those decisions are guided by professional actuaries, financial folks, and legal standards, but also by the circumstances of each individual cities in TMRS's case, and each individual system in the case of other public retirement systems. As I believe the TMRS actuaries have pointed out, the decisions that have been made by the TMRS board have proven to be good for the system, and although they do not align with some of the proposed Pension Review Board guidelines. I'll give you an example. TMRS adopted a 10-year asset smoothing policy in 2009 and amended the policy in 2011, still retaining the 10-year smoothing but adjusting the corridors used. Those policies have proven to be appropriate for our system, reducing the volatility of returns and the effects on the city contribution rates. If the Pension Review Board's proposed 5-year smoothing guideline had been in effect, the board might have felt an obligation to adopt a shorter accounting period. According to our actuaries, a 5-year smoothing policy would have resulted in greater year-to-year volatility in the recognition of investment losses and gains, which would have meant less stability in city contribution rates. I believe that TMRS is the best designed retirement system in the country, and one of the main things that keep it strong is its regulatory framework that recognizes the importance of fiduciary choice in funding policy, plan benefit design, investment decisions, and important elements of plan administration. I strongly and respectfully encourage the Pension Review Board members not to create a set of guidelines that would reduce or narrow our options or the tools available to trustees that could discourage them from taking actions they need to take that are appropriate for their specific circumstances of their plan. Even though they are just guidelines and do not have the force of law, to the extent they are used to as a benchmark to evaluate a system, the guidelines may end up being viewed as a de facto standard and may indirectly limit options that are available to system trustees. And at the risk of looking silly, I'm going to try to make an analogy to make a point. And it's quite easy for me to make myself look silly, so I'm used to it. But I've heard the board talk about that these are guidelines, and I think it's important that this group, provide systems, a framework to work within. But I think the ASOPs have provided and served well for a long period of time, and I think that there are some systems, as we heard from this morning, and we know who they are across the state, that are not in the position they should be. But I think for them to get out of the situation that they're in is going to take all the tools and options that they can use going into the future. And I heard Dallas mentions today something about 40-year, and I'm here you're talking about narrowing that. But there are circumstances where plans will need a long-term solution to work out of where they are, and many of those plans that need that help would be outside of the guidelines, and also plans like TMRS that I think are doing a great job because of our staff and our actuaries and the professionals that we hire to do that, and to the Board of Trustees who every month are diligent about not only looking at today but in the future of how to keep this plan secure, sustainable for the long term to provide benefits to public servants. But my analogy is the EEOC, the Internal Revenue Service, they put out guidelines, and there are a lot of unintended consequences and really force behind those guidelines, and I think we all have to pay attention to those. And I don't want an unintended consequence be of that not be realized that a set of guidelines can carry more weight than just saying the words that they're just guidelines. And so I respectfully would request that you really take a look at the effect of narrowing these guidelines or handcuffing plans that may need, and TMRS is not one, even though we would be out of the guidelines. And my concern is waking up in the morning one day and say, well, Mr. Parrish, why is TMRS not following the Pension Review Board guidelines? And I'll have 4,000 employees and participants and retirees calling me saying, you're outside of the guidelines, but every indication would show we have a healthy, vibrant pension plan. So I'll be quiet and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Parrish, it would be, so I share your desire not to over-regulate. We are not a regulatory body, but not to put in place guidelines that would have unintended consequences, but it would be useful for you to be specific. If I look at TMRS's funding, I agree that it's a well-funded, well-managed system. It looks like to me that it would be in full compliance with the guidelines as we've discussed them here at this board meeting. With the change on the 10-year versus 5-year smoothing, it's fully within the guidelines. So it seems to me that TMRS would meet them. In fact, if I look at the letter, it looks like your own statute ties to 25-year. With some flexibility if there are extenuating circumstances, which I view these guidelines as setting up a target. If there are extenuating circumstances that require it, you can go beyond. So I almost look at TMRS. In fact, when we were talking about guidelines, I used TMRS as an example. And so Are there other things that concern you besides the 10-year that I think we have incorporated in the option, at least the one, my preferred option in the draft? Are there other elements, and maybe Mr. Newton is the right person to speak to that, and
Yes, he
perhaps he's
is.
going to.
Yes, he
But
is.
it seems like TMRS is in compliance with the guidelines as they're laid out here. Maybe you have additional concerns. I share your general statement, but it would be very useful to be specific.
Sure. I think it gets back to some of the points you were making earlier about how guidelines can dictate policy. And right now, the TMRS has this ability we may never use again, okay, which is we can push them back to 30 in whatever word you just used, I can't say right now because I've been sitting back there in the cold.
Extenuating
circumstances. And so right now, when you have a maximum of 40, even if it's moved to 30, even in those extenuating circumstances, they're still within this line. Now, someday down the road, all of a sudden the 40 that's in current state statute is being re-examined. And then my understanding, when the 40 was chosen, there sure was a lot of eyes put to what the PRB guidelines were at the time. I could see the legislature saying, well, we're going to tighten this up. What was the PRB using? That clearly had to have been fully vetted. That's been a good number. We'll just use that one. So that is an unintended consequence. It may never happen, and we never need to use the 30. The point is, that is where it's not the target. It's in these situations where we may need it. Right now, we do have some individual cities in TMRS who still have an amortization period past 25, 28, 29. We do not have any more. We do not have any above 30.
Are you concerned about the ones that are above 25?
I'm not, because we have a closed, laddered, pulling down amortization approach, and that's some of my comments in a minute, how the current guidelines are really dictated to fixed rate plans. And that there are situations when some of these other funding strategies that don't necessarily fit exactly into how these guidelines are laid out.
I'm sorry, this is actually a discussion. This would be useful perhaps to clarify. This is a discussion that we had at the actuarial committee. We're not trying to dictate what amortization policy is, the specifics of funding policy. In fact, we explicitly decided not to take any action on discount rate, for example. I think that number 4 is the key here around amortization, and we're talking about effective amortization. So the result of all your funding policy, you should target being below 25, and lower is better.
And my strong recommendation is that needs to be more clearly defined here.
So you're recommending that in
right now,
number 4 or in the preamble, we should better define
somewhere that when you're talking about amortization, it needs to be outlined what you're talking about. Because, for example, at TMRS, until this year, we had some cities using 30-year laddered funding approach. And I would say that if you ask them what they're using 30. And so they would all read this and think that they're not in this guideline. When I would argue 30-year laddered is materially better than 25-year fixed, as far as where you're going to be. And so that's just the comment that I have is lining that out so that we know what we're supposed to be looking at and when you're in it and when you're not. Because fixed rate plans, based on a lot of modeling, but fixed rate plan is a more risky situation than an actually determined contribution strategy. Just on its own, it's much more risk because you don't have an automatic adjustment built in to force a decision. Using the same guidelines may not necessarily, sometimes somewhere that needs to be taken into account. And I think you could be a little bit more lenient with an automatically determined plan and some parameters than you could be with a fixed rate. And that's kind of the...
Yeah, I think that, so our language, we modified the language on the AV report to hopefully better reflect this.
Yes, I saw
we
that.
care about outcomes more than we care about the inputs into the funding policy here. And that was a discussion that we had at the actuarial committee meeting as well. And so this number 4 is meant to be around the outcome. So the outcome of the funding policy, the target should be below 25. Would you agree with that statement?
I agree that's the intent.
Okay.
And I think that would be somehow to get that a little clearer.
Clarifying the language. Got it.
But I think it's, not to interrupt Joe, but just to point out that Joe, I think, is still making the point that, at least in our case, having the opportunity to push up our amortization period back up to 30 might be something that we'd like to consider, that we'd like to have that in our toolbox. And it could be done in a way in which the effective amortization period, in effect does become 30 or close to 30 for some of our cities if we took that action. So having that tool in the toolbox, not being considered to be outside of a guideline would be useful for us.
Well, so from my perspective, and others might have different perspective, your statute already says 25. So whenever you go above 25, you're already you can do it, you just have to justify it. Right? I think this is even more lenient than that. If you can still do it, we're not taking any tools out of any toolboxes. We don't have the authority to do that. And your statute does more to take tools out of toolboxes than we do. And all we're asking is if you go above, that you have a good justification. Sounds like you can provide good justification in the instances where you would go above, and I think that would be fine with this board. I think we're more concerned in instances where people are caught unaware, especially the plan sponsor, and there is not good justification, and the plan sponsor lets a problem area fester for too long to the point that there are no good options to adjust.
And my comment to that would be that although to kind of reiterate Mr. Parrish's point, is that in some cases these guidelines can become de facto standards. But if in fact you believe that there should be flexibility in how people use these guidelines, if you will, then place that in your preamble. Provide more clarity to the users that in fact you can color outside the lines in some cases, as long as you have a basis for doing that and you have a plan to get back within the guidelines. Might be useful for the users to have.
Yeah, and I think that might be an argument for not necessarily having your maximum and your preferred range the same. That could be an argument for having why you would have two different ones. One is your preferred range, get in this range, but yes, if you're having to use flexibility, here's kind of where that range is too.
I'm not sure how far apart we are on this. I don't think very far, but it may be. I would have an interest in trying to write this in a way that would be something that TMRS would think would be reasonable. But would you give us a draft of what you think would be reasonable for TMRS?
Well, I would hope it's not just reasonable for TMRS. I mean, what I would like to see is one that's...
We're not going to do it unless we thought it would also be acceptable to others.
And by the way, Keith, very kudos to the top section. I like, describing what we're trying to do here is good. And if this is the audience, this needs to be written so that audience understands what this is.
Right.
It's not important that we understand what it is. This audience that we're talking about up here needs to understand what it is. And so that's a little bit different. You say single equivalent effective amortization period. Okay, what is that? So we just need to pay attention to what that means and make it a little clearer. So,
well, you're certainly encouraged, if you're willing to do it, to give us your suggested verbiage as to how it would affect you, and we'll consider that.
Be happy to do that
as we move forward. We're going to have another actual committee meeting in December, and then the board as a whole will meet in January.
Perhaps one last point, if I could make, and with regard to the actuarial changes we've undergone over the last several years, and the success that we've had in improving our funded ratio, decreasing our amortization period, it was all accomplished within your current guidelines. In other words, adding other guidelines to us would not have caused us to not accomplish what we accomplished.
You guys are more proactive than most.
So if you
try to
went further, you don't want to put
us... From our actuaries is likely the advice, hopefully, all other actuaries are giving their plans
now, this is turning into a plug for
No, it's not. It's a plug for the process. It's a plug for direct communication between the actuary and the people just making the decisions. So
I wouldn't want to let the moment pass without echoing the compliments to TMRS. I have had a long-standing respect for the plan design and the governance structure. Obviously, it is a system that works and works really well, and I appreciate that.
Well,
I
thank
share
you.
that, and think that when I think of all of our systems, I think your system and the county and district system stand out in terms of doing things well.
Well, thank you for saying that, but it's a team effort. I mean, it takes a lot of different professionals to make this work, and it needs a good governance by the board over the years to make sure they always look to, not just to the past, but to today and to the future of where we need to be. And that's where our staff, our professionals, our actuaries, and our board members have been very good about doing that. And so I think, always have a term, I don't want to, there are some plans that are having a very difficult time. But what I try not to do at the City of Plano is to comprehensively overreact over some certain bad issues, and we do have some bad issues that come up periodically at the City of Plano, but we try to focus on let's get to the bottom of that issue and how that happened without overall changes to policies across the city for everyone. It's kind of like I'm full of poor analogies, but a dress code. Someone shows up one day not dressed appropriate. Somebody wants to rewrite the entire policy, and so that's just what I encourage. I can't say how much I appreciate at the actual committee meeting how open this group was to hearing the need and the survey from the participants, and the time that you've given us today really means a lot to us. That you'd let us give our input.
Well, consider whether you want to put any of this in writing, or maybe you'll decide you don't.
Mr. May I suggest, it would be great, our staff can reach out whenever they're, I think we've got a little bit of work to do in the language that we're using in the preamble, and Vice Chair Brainerd will help with that. But it would be useful to get your input on that. I don't want to put the ball fully in your court just because it might be hard for you to respond, but have them specifically reach out to you around the language in the preamble, laying out that we're concerned with outcomes here, and that this is, I think we've made it pretty clear that this is for both the plan and the plan sponsor, and we're trying to facilitate a conversation about what they should actually do on the ground. We're not specifying what they should do on the ground. And then also in number 4, saying that we care about the outcome, the amortization period outcome, and not necessarily the specifics of the funding policy.
Well, we appreciate you allowing us to do that, and I'll put my chairman of the board hat on and tell you that we can make that happen and get you some responses.
Mr. Chairman, can I take this opportunity to compliment them also, since I get a check from them every month?
Do you think that'll make your check bigger?
I just hope it continues.
Well, the way they manage it, I think it will. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we provide a couple more comments? And then we'll provide the detail at y'all's next meeting, but I want to talk about a couple of the other points.
Okay.
Not to prolong the idea here, but I think the first thing, if we're talking about funding guidelines, we're already talking about all the parameters. To me, there needs to be a number 1 across the top, which is something like actual contributions should be greater than or equal to the amount recommended by the actuary. Because who cares what your smoothing period is if you're not going to put in either amount? And maybe you have a comment in there that says greater than or equal to, comma, or on a path to be, comma, greater than, or, if you're not there today, but you're going to be there soon. Something like that just is the overall theme of what we're fixing to talk about. Because again, who cares what parameter we're using if we're not going to put in either amount?
Do you guys have the red line version of this thing?
I think
the
so.
Options? Okay. Does number 5, are you just saying move number 5 up?
Yeah, I'm still confused as to number what 5 is. Is that what it's supposed to be? Is that what it's supposed to do? Is talk about the...
But it's referring just to fixed rate plans, I believe.
I thought 5 was somehow...
It's where
overriding 4.
The problem, the reason it says fixed rate plans there, it should just say all plans. We don't necessarily, you're correct that we don't need to specify fixed rate plans. The reason it says fixed rate plans is because the starting point, if you look back at our questions, was should we encourage fixed rate plans to move towards an actuarial contribution model? As Mr. Newton has suggested. And so that's why it's in there. You could replace fixed rate plans with all plans, and I think it says what you just said.
Okay, now I understand. Okay, I didn't realize that's what, okay.
We could just strike for fixed rate plans.
Correct.
And I would move it up.
Mr. Newton
It
is
would be
suggesting
number
that
1.
we use that as number 1 to kind of set the tone.
But anyway, okay, now I understand. Because I was confused why we were all of a sudden talking about fixed rate plans, and that somehow our target year was 25, and all of a sudden now it's 30. Like what? So now I think, okay, all right.
And actually, there were different options. One option was a 25-year, not 30-year.
Right, there's two options, and that probably should tie with whatever maximum number you come over here, I would think, but.
That was why my option 2 suggested that we tie it back to the 25 so that we'd be consistent.
Okay, to the AVA, so earlier there was discussion that you're trying not to be prescriptive, and if you put a 5 here, if you put a 10 here, you're being prescriptive. Like you're not even kind of being prescriptive. And most plans use 5. Most of my plans use 5. Okay, that is not the reason to use 5 all the time. That is a fact. That's not necessarily justification. And one of the things we like to do a lot with our clients, especially in something like TMRS, where we have the ability to mold a funding policy and a strategy, is to be strategic with these decisions. And in TMRS's case, we have a lot of positive things that were working for us. And based on input from the board, clearly one of their goals, or one of their concerns, I bet would be the better way to say it, is contribution rate instability. And so we looked at everything else we were doing and say, you know what, we've got, on a risk meter here, we've got a little room. We can be a little lenient on this one item, but we made them put that corridor around it. And so when you look at it in total, we are not taking more risk, and in fact, it models out to be better and provide more protection to the downside. It's just a situation where as soon as you put 5 here, you've now created a straw man for me that we're going to have to defend against when the PRB, from what I've seen, hasn't done any quantitative analysis on why it should be 5. So, because I can tell you when you model it out, there's a reason when CalPERS did this, they came up with 15. When you model this stuff out, longer looks a lot better. It also, when you look at economic patterns, economic cycles, there's not one that's 5 years long. There's some that are 4, there's some that are 18 months, there's some that are 8, there's some that are 40. There's not one that's 5. Like 5 is just this arbitrary number. So just be careful when as soon as you put a number here, it's now prescriptive. I actually like the idea of A, B, and C because of the audience we've talked about back at the beginning, and it gets back to something that was brought up at the actual committee meeting when I was listening to it, was the discussion of the ASOPs, and there was a discussion of how broad they were, and that's true. But I think the better point that was made is just how a normal reader that goes and reads them is probably not going to be able to pick out what the standard is actually saying. So I think in a situation like this, a Cliff Notes version, a very high-level version of what the ASOPs say about this topic right here on this page for this board member or plan sponsor to be able to use, that's not any more prescriptive than what the ASOP is, and doesn't change the definition of the ASOP in any way, but just gives them the ability to see what it is. And I think you could actually take that a step further and do the same for the discount rate, because some of the discussions about the discount rate, whether it needs to be forward-looking, that's in the ASOP. The ASOP says you need to be forward-looking. You need to be looking at current economic data and forward metrics. So you're not adding any more restrictions that are currently in the ASOP. You could come up with a Cliff Note 4 or 5 bullet point thing that could also go here and again accomplish kind of what you're trying to accomplish without being more restrictive, and it might actually be a benefit to whoever this audience is that we're talking about here. And I don't know what other educational materials y'all have. I'm sure y'all have lots of things that you're providing to boards and things, but this is more of a kind of a one-page spot.
Do I understand correctly that right now the board, at least today, the board is not considering having some sort of a guideline with regard to the discount rate? I don't see it in the guidelines, the proposed guidelines that were.
Not this. It was in the questions, and I'm not saying you should add to what's already there. I'm just saying clarifying what's already in the ASOP, because that seems to be the discussion back a lot in the questions, and the answers was, well, there's already ASOPs on this, there's already ASOPs on this.
Well, that was a particular set of audience members who were actuaries who wanted to make sure that they had as much flexibility as possible, right. And the ASOPs provide that.
Like me,
so,
yeah. Right.
So I totally get that, right? So I think this is a really good point, though, that we're actually talking about the inputs to the funding plan, and by and large, we have tried to stay away from that. I think for this board, we should consider significantly altering our recommendation in 6, as long as we are maintaining number 4, which is the amortization. I think that's the key. We've said it over and over again. Having that, the result is we have an amortization period that's below 5 or 25 is good, and it's kind of doesn't matter that much what we specify as smoothing as long as that's a true statement. I do have some concern, and maybe unfounded, that, if I look at our AV reports, there's a $10 billion difference between AVA and MVA.
Sure.
And it's not clear that over the next 5 or 10 years, that's going to go in the right direction, right?
Yeah, that's more of an argument against the discount rate itself, not the smoothing policy.
Well, the smoothing just means you react slowly to reality on the ground. That's kind of the pejorative way to put, we need stability in our contribution rate, but that just means you react slowly, and so the amount that you end up having to pay gets bigger. But I totally, I take to heart the fact that this focuses more on inputs to the funding policy, and so we should consider significantly altering 6.
Yeah, it's an interesting exercise to look at the length of smoothing periods, because you actually spend, the last 15 years is a little bit different, but you actually spend a lot more time in deferred gain position than you do deferred loss position if you look throughout time. And so longer smoothing periods actually defer that reduction in contribution rate that can occur from that quite a bit. Now, you have to be careful on the other end when something like what the situation we're currently finding ourselves in, but I think there's a lot of overreaction to the situation we're in now, thinking this is how life is and will always be and always has been, when that's not true. And just like in the 90s, that's not how it was always going to be and always had been and always will be either. And so something that provides a little more linkage and a little more long-term perspective is not necessarily bad. Again, if you've measured up against the other risks you have, if you're using a 35 or a 40-year amortization period and you have a fixed rate plan, then no, you should not be using 10-year smoothing. Like, that is just pushing out everything. But if you have a plan that has a 10-year level dollar amortization period, you could use 15-year smoothing. You're probably all right, because it's the if you start thinking about the totals. So anyway, there's just more to it than just one number. So
We'll bring up smoothing at the actuarial committee.
all right. Sorry.
And point well taken that we should focus on outcomes and not inputs. It makes our job of communicating this stuff easier and focuses where our attention should be.
Right. Thank you, guys.
Again, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, are there any additional comments from the audience on the guidelines? We'll have another actuarial committee meeting as well as another PRB meeting to discuss this as well. If you have comments, you can.
David Stacy, Midland Fireman's Relief and Retirement Fund. I just would like to reinforce Mr. Parrish's very well-spoken comments about the de facto possibility of a de facto standard. I know the board wants to look at this as guidelines, but when you look at history of what actions the board has done in the past, somehow or another guidelines have become statute. It has occurred. It's not an academic discussion. It has passed guidelines that this board has adopted or recommended or been asked about have in fact become statute. So just be mindful of as Mr. Parrish very well put, there are potential unintended consequences of guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any others? We'll be discussing this again at the actuarial committee meeting, so I encourage those, and there'll be another round of feedback solicited from the plans. So do we need to discuss, provide you guidance on potential alterations, or should we do that at the actuarial committee meeting?
We can certainly do that at the actuarial committee meeting. However, if we are shooting for the January deadline, if we can.
So I think, and my fellow board members can correct me if I am not on point, I think that we need to find a way to additionally alter the title and the preamble to clearly indicate that what we care about is funding progress or funding outcomes. And I think those two words would be useful to include somewhere. So like in the title, pension funding progress guidelines or something like that would be helpful. On number 4, I am comfortable with option 2 that Vice Chair Brainerd has suggested without changes. I think that on number 5, we have discussed striking the specific statement about fixed rate plans and moving the statement about contribution sufficiency up to be higher in the document. I like option 2 because of its simplicity and tying it to number 4. And then on number 6, my preference right now, having the input that we provided and the great testimony that was provided by TMRS, I think we should just strike number 6. And I don't think we should get into inputs to the funding policy. And I think that of all the things that we could choose to put in here on the input side, this probably has the least impact. If we were going to put something on the input side, it probably should be the discount rate, and we're staying away from that, so we should probably just stay away from it altogether. And everything else is fine with me.
So your proposal is to strike 6 entirely?
I could be convinced otherwise, but another option could be to strike D and just keep ABC. But it's unclear to me why we would get into smoothing necessarily when we haven't gotten into things like discount rate.
No, I don't disagree.
I agree.
So that would be my proposed guidance for staff. Any other input from other board members?
I think we mentioned that we wanted to get some input from some of the speakers. Is it a timeline that they can provide their input to us?
I think the plan is to modify this, talk about it at the next actuarial committee meeting, and then put it out for comment between the actuarial committee meeting and our next board meeting, and then be able to finalize that at our January meeting. So there will be multiple chances for input, 3. So there would be the actuarial committee meeting where people show up and give us great advice. There would be the actual outreach to plans and constituents to solicit their input, and then there would be the PRB meeting where people could come and provide comments before we take action.
Mr. Chair, if I could make just a suggestion. If the board will arrive today at a general finalized draft, would it be helpful to make that draft available to the public to provide comment prior to the committee meeting, so they would have some ideas to consider at that meeting?
So that's certainly an option which I was going to propose. We
I
can
think that's better.
make the changes based on the comments we've received today, as well as board member input, develop an exposure draft, provide that draft to the members as well as to our constituents to start soliciting comments before the December actuarial committee meeting. And we can continue on with that process. If the committee members have additional changes to the draft language, we can continue on with that process, solicit additional comments before the board meeting, so we can come back with a more thoroughly vetted and reviewed proposal.
With the goal of having this finalized at a board meeting in January. I'd like to do that as opposed to pushing that date back, and things get real busy during the legislative session, and to get this finished then would be good.
Sure, and members could certainly consider adopting the guidelines in January and discuss when they would want to make the guidelines effective for our constituents.
Right, and that could be at a future date.
You mean effective for the presentation in our materials?
That's correct.
Correct. Okay.
I would like to just go on record, I'd prefer 30 to 25.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question. What, for what is leaving 6 in for the moment, the guideline that is number 8, the monitor, review, and report the impact of the actual plan experience once every 5 years, what's the difference between, I guess, a report on the actual plan experience as opposed to the actuarial valuation that's required under 802-101?
So right now, there is a requirement, there's a size requirement for doing the experience study, AV and experience study, and there was concern that some of our...
You should clarify, it's a statutory requirement.
Yes, sorry, not
Statute
our requirement, it's
requires an
statutory
experience
requirement, which she is referencing. And there was concern, I think from Vice Chair Brainerd specifically, that the smaller plans weren't looking at plan experience often enough and considering how that should impact their assumptions. And so this was just a general statement that all plans should do this regardless of size on a 5-year basis.
And so we did not want to impose an experience study per se on smaller plans because of the cost. And in particular, Mr. Stacy articulated very well the fact that in the course of performing valuations and monitoring and measuring and reporting to us, they are fulfilling the requirements of number 8. And so we simply included that rather than requiring or providing a guideline that they conduct a formal experience study.
And just to quickly build on that, Stephanie, the section that you are referring to of the statute relates to plans conducting an actuarial valuation, which is something our systems either do annually, biannually, or once every 3 years, where the actuary provides a point-in-time snapshot of the financial health of the plan as well as recommends future contribution. The section that the members are referring to is 802.1014, which discusses experience study for systems over a certain asset threshold to be conducted once every 5 years. And the recommended guideline 8 would go a step further and allow for some leeway for smaller plan pension boards to determine whether or not they have credible experience to conduct the study, but make that as a recommendation for all systems to conduct those as a best practice.
I have a question or a comment on the amortization period. I think we're talking about 25 years, but I was wondering, is there a reason why we couldn't give a range between 25 and 30, just to give inbuilt flexibility into it?
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Well, I think what we're talking about is amortization period of 25 years. And I'm wondering, is there a reason why we couldn't have a range of amortization period between 25 and 30 years to give it an inbuilt flexibility instead of giving that one 25-year cutoff number? Is there a statutory reason for that? We couldn't be more flexible in it?
No, I think it's more of a simplicity of presentation. We're giving flexibility up to 25, and truthfully, we're giving flexibility above. We're just saying this should be kind of your maximum target for amortization. So there's flexibility all the way up to 25. We're saying our preferable target is a range below that. From my perspective, I would like for plans to be fully funded, which would be an amortization period of nothing, an effective amortization of 0. I think that we're providing a lot of flexibility in the statement and just setting out a maximum and then setting out a preferred target range kind of puts a couple of stakes in the ground that I think helps people understand where we're trying to get.
Ernest, my takeaway from the suggestions from the TMRS folks was that there may be some circumstances that would warrant going beyond 30 years, and my expectation was that the actuarial committee would work with the TMRS to come up with language that would accommodate moving up to 30 years under certain circumstances.
Yeah, because the reason I made my comment was I think there was one of the cities that have a statute of 30 years already. So what will happen in that instance if we go to 25 years?
it wouldn't, our guidelines don't affect statute. Their statute would be their statute. There's a lot of different numbers included in statute on amortization. In fact, TMRS, who we just saw, their statute says 25.
Okay.
So what do we need to do to get to an actual draft here?
We do have a motion for that, and again, it's going to be a draft to solicit additional comments to bring back to the actuarial committee on December 15th. And we have a motion for that.
So
Instead of finalizing, we could say second draft.
how much do we have to, information should I put in this motion?
You would just basically say a motion to
Finalize a draft
to
that incorporates the
finalize
feedback.
a draft that incorporates the feedback discussed, and I think you should identify which of the options you're going with.
All right, so
As a
before we do that, were we generally comfortable with what I laid out as our feedback for staff with an additional comment around exploring options between 25 and 30?
Yep, I'm all right with that.
Okay, so the chair entertains a motion to direct staff to finalize a draft of the PRB guidelines for actuarial soundness, incorporating survey responses and board discussion to be sent to the system to their actuary for public comment. The amendments for this were to explore language changes that better clarifies the purpose of the guidelines in both the title and the preamble that selects option 2 and still provides an option for 30 both 30 and 25 years as the actuarial accrued liability over a period not to exceed. On number 5, choosing option 2 and striking 4 fixed rate plans. And they're tying the 25 to having 2 options between 25 and 30. Striking number 6 altogether. And then that is the extent of the recommended changes.
So just one question, in 5, option 2, is there some type of defined definition associated with our industry standard for normal cost?
Normal cost, so maybe others should speak to this, and who can provide, normal cost is a term that is used commonly in actuarial reports, and is something that plans will calculate. So it's a term of art that is well understood and does not have ambiguity in its meaning, although it is calculated in different ways.
It's calculated by the actuary for the fund, each particular fund.
Would you recommend, do you think that we should explore including a definition?
A definition of normal cost?
Yes.
I think it's pretty well understood by the various retirement systems that we work with.
The current guidelines, number 2, does use the term normal cost, and I don't think that we have had too many problems with people understanding that. Mr. May, would that be yours?
That's my opinion.
For those who might not know, the normal cost is the cost of benefits accrued each year. That's all. It's separate from the cost of paying down the unfunded liability. So if the plan is fully funded and has no unfunded liabilities, normal cost is the cost of the plan.
Well put. So are we good with just using the term normal cost?
And members,
All right.
do you want to move number 5 to make it number 1?
I think it's going to be kind of hard, just given that it's going to reference number 4. But we could consider that if we wanted to, I think at a later date. Would be my preference. Okay, so the chair entertains a motion to direct staff to finalize a draft of the PRB guidelines for actuarial soundness, incorporating survey responses and the board discussion we just had, to be sent to the system and their actuaries for public comment. May I get a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded to direct staff to finalize a draft of the PRB guidelines for actuarial soundness, incorporating survey responses and board discussion to be sent to the systems and their actuaries for public comment. Any other board discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just a comment. I think 5, 6 years I've been sitting here, I always reiterate the comment that we've heard over and over again about how our guidance turns into more than that for some other people. But what's impressive to me, especially with this actuarial committee meeting, that they take that information and are willing to negotiate and make amendments. So I appreciate that. But it does carry a lot of weight whether we think it's guidance or not. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion is to direct staff to finalize a draft of the PRB guidelines for actuarial soundness, incorporating survey responses and board discussion to be sent to the systems and their actuaries for public comment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And then I think to close out this agenda item, we just need to note that the next actuarial committee meeting will be Thursday, December 15th, 2016, here in Austin. And the location will be, do we know the location yet?
I think it's in your office building. isn't it?
Yeah, it'll be at the PRB, the Pension Review Board office building.
The place people don't like very much.
Moving on to item C. Mr. May.
Oh, yeah. She coming up.
Yep. Good afternoon, members.
You're will give us a report on
Yes.
compliance.
Ashley Rendon, I'm the policy analyst at the PRB, and I will try to be as brief as possible. Behind tab 5, we have the Public Retirement System Compliance and Reporting summary, and this is for the audited annual financial report, membership report, and investment returns and assumptions report that reports that we receive from plans annually. And so as you can see, just from the summary of the first 3 boxes here, 3 tables, they really haven't changed that much from the last board meeting, although we did have quite a big due date at the end of July, where plans were added and taken off. And so if we can turn to the next page here, for the plans non-compliant over 60 days, we did, from the last meeting, take some plans off again and added some 3 plans that were due at the end of July and have just reached their 60-day non-compliant date at the end of September. Of note, Paris Firefighters Relief and Retirement Fund, we did receive their information, so there are only 4 plans currently on this list. The next couple of pages are examples of the non-compliant letters to sponsors that we send at the 60-day non-compliance date. It's a non-compliance letter. The next one is the compliance letter that we send to sponsors once we receive those reports. And then the last item in this report is the total net assets, and I wanted to remind the board that these are from the most recent financial report that we received from the plans, and so this is market value. And then if there are no questions, I can move to the next item, which is behind tab 6. You'll find the list of plans that are immediately subject to the Funding Soundness Restoration Plan formulation. And so the difference of this report from the last board meeting, we had a plan come off, which means that we received an actuarial valuation that showed the amortization period under 40 years, and we added a plan that was on the next list, which is the systems at risk of FSRP formulation requirement, which was Dallas Employees Retirement Fund. Also, we added the last column here, which is the FSRP receive date from the PRB. It is of note that we have received quite a few more, actually 4 more FSRPs from plans, so we're currently waiting on 2. which would be from Galveston Employees Retirement Plan for Police and San Angelo Firemen's Relief and Retirement Fund.
And members, just a quick note here, we haven't had a chance to review these funding soundness restoration plans yet. We will start reviewing them soon, and if we have questions, concerns, we'd be reaching out to the systems to work with them to make sure we agree with the submitted plan.
What do the logistics look like from here on out? Do we post these publicly? Does the board get an update?
We will certainly provide an update to the board at the January meeting. The next step for us in the process is to provide compliance information or update the legislature on where the systems stand with these FSRPs, which we will do through our biennial report, which is due at the end of this month.
Okay.
And also provide an update during session.
Is the FSRP response coming from the plan or the plan sponsor?
The plan itself is being submitted by the systems. However, we have requested the systems to include either in a letter format or somehow indicate that both the city and the system have signed off on the adopted plan.
Yes, and then the next page lists the systems at risk of FSRP formulation, which would be, we received an actuarial evaluation that shows the plan has an amortization period over 40 years, but they haven't, it's not the 2 consecutive or 3 consecutive valuations as per the statute. And so the last report on the next page is, it's actually a letter from Representative Dennis Paul. At the last board meeting, the board asked for staff to seek clarification on the implementation regarding future deadlines for this FSRP requirement. And so Representative Paul provided that clarification in this letter, which he stated that in the future, for plans that would be immediately at risk or immediately subject to the FSRP formulation requirement, they would have 6 months after the adoption of the actuarial valuation to come up with the FSRP, and then again 31 days to send that to the PRB. And that concludes my report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Let's see, how does that, would that apply time-wise to Dallas Fire Police?
For Dallas Police and Fire, I think their funding shortfall concerns are more acute and immediate, but they are not subject to the FSR. Technically, they are not subject to the FSRP requirement just yet. The next valve that we receive from them, which would trigger the requirement, would make them immediately subject to, which we expect to receive in 2017.
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty with Dallas is the situation deteriorated so fast. I mean, 2 years ago, they were saying they were 75% funded.
Right.
So in those situations, the FSRP is set up for relatively slow-moving.
Which is mostly, I think, in the history of this board, that's worked well. I mean, the Dallas Fire Police particularly is something I haven't seen before, just through the history of this board. Deteriorate as fast as they did.
Thank you. I think that closes up this item unless there are additional comments from the board. So this completes the work of the Actuarial Committee. Thank you, Mr. May. Mr. Massengale, I believe you're going to provide us an update on the work of the Legislative Committee.
Mr. Chairman, would you allow me to call on our Executive Director to give us that update?
Sure. And members, the remaining 2 agenda items are mostly updates. We are not requesting any board action on these. For the 84th legislative interim charges, I wanted to make the members aware that the House Pensions Committee is going to hold another hearing on November 14th to examine immediate and long-term fiscal impact to the state of the unfunded liabilities associated with the law enforcement and custodial officer supplemental retirement fund, that's a mouthful, LECOS, which is part of the Employees Retirement System. Currently, LECOS is at infinite. House Pensions Committee would be hearing from the Employees Retirement System, and the PRB would be available as a resource witness. The next item under this agenda is the 2015-16 biennial report. The PRB statute requires the board to provide the biennial report to the legislature explaining the work and findings of the board every even-numbered years. And this report can actually include any drafts or recommendations of any legislation relating to retirement systems that the board finds advisable. Staff is currently working on this report, and the deadline for submission is, I believe, November 30th.
And you plan to circulate that to the board for any comments from us prior to?
We will certainly provide a draft to the members before submitting the report.
Submitting the report requires no action from us?
It does not, given it's a statutory
Great.
requirement. And the last item on the agenda is behind tab, I believe it's 7. We have included an update of the agency's operating budget for the members to know we are on track to meet our budget, and it's mostly an update.
Is there anything that you'd like to highlight on this budget that we should pay attention to?
Not at this time, given it's still early on in the fiscal year. Down the line, when we I provide the next update, if there are questions or concerns, I'll make sure that I highlight those.
Are there any questions from the board on the legislative committee update or the operating budget that we see here? Seeing none, that completes both the legislative update as well as the fiscal year 2017 operating budget discussion. Thank you, Anu. Thank you, Mr. Massengill.
Thank you, Anu.
So we're on number 9 here on our agenda, call for future agenda items. Would any board members like to add any items to our future agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 10, the date and location of our next meeting. The next meeting will be that's a good so on number 9, I actually think it would be good for us to get a further update on Dallas. Both the employee retirement plan and the police and fire plan. As well as there's a proposed reform plan in the city of Houston that would affect all 3 of their plans. I think it would be useful for us to get an update on that plan as well at our next board meeting going into legislative session. And at that point, there should be, I've seen some of the numbers for Houston, but they should have it completely laid out. We probably, I would direct staff, as we move towards legislative session, there are likely to be other reform plans that come out. There are cities that are considering reform. I would like to just keep it on our radar that we would like to hear from any substantive reforms that are proposed for the plans over which we have oversight.
And you're talking about doing this at the January board meeting?
At the January board meeting, correct. I think we should hear from Dallas and Houston. I think we should just get an update on all the reforms that are moving. I don't necessarily know that we have to hear specifically from the plans in other places. All right. So date and location of next PRB board meeting is going to be Thursday, January 26th, 2017, here in Austin, likely in this room. Probably not here. In a room here in Austin. So invitation for public comment. Does anybody have any public comment that they would like to add? Max? As long as it's not smoky, right?
Max Patterson with Texfers. Two areas I just wanted to comment on. The first one is the Dallas situation, and hearing some of the comments made by the mayor. One thing I want to point out is that I think the Dallas situation is extremely unique, and it should not be looked upon as a situation that would likely occur in other cities. You have a situation there that was caused by, if I be a little bit blunt and characterize it as the way that the system was managed and a lack of involvement by the city. I think I found over the last 20 years that city governments have historically ignored their pension plans, and they did not pay any attention to them until it severely impacted their budgets. Unfortunately, city managers and mayors tend to be focused on their budgets and the line items, and they want to balance them, and they try and put the money in streets and parks and things other than wages and benefits and pensions. And so when that cost came through, then they became concerned about it. But the one thing that they don't understand about pension is once you incur a big financial cost in a pension, it's too late to fix it. It's like letting the cows all out. And the fix is very long term. They had council-appointed members on the board that quite often missed. It's not unique to Dallas. The same thing is in Houston, where the appointees don't show up at the meetings. They miss a lot. They have other interests, and when that happens, you end up in situations like this. I think another point I would point out is it's also interesting to hear how he almost tried to shift the blame to the state, and keep referencing the state did this, the state did that. The state did nothing more than approve what was brought to them. And what I would question is, if you go back to the specific times that the plan was changes occurred, did anyone from the mayor's office or the city council show up at the PRB hearing and oppose those changes? Did they show up at the House or Senate committee hearing and oppose those changes? I think you might be surprised, because my experience is if you have an elected official show up at a House hearing or a Senate hearing, they get a lot of attention. Elected officials pay a lot of attention to other elected officials, even though they may be only at the local level. And had they occurred at those hearings that opposed the changes, I'd be surprised if they would have just overrode those concerns and implemented them. And so, and I still detect a sense that the mayor feels that the city is not financially obligated for the pension plan, and he may be way off base on that point. The other comment I want to make has to do with the guidelines. One suggestion is, instead of using the term guidelines, I was thinking it maybe a term closer to best practice. It's what we're trying to do is you're trying to control human behavior, and you can't regulate human behavior. You can write all the guidelines, rules, regulations you want, and if I choose to ignore them, I'm just going to ignore them, and I'm going to do what I want to do until I get caught. And if I don't read the guidelines or don't even know where they exist, then it doesn't matter, because I didn't even know they existed, and so I'm still going to do what I want to do. And I think back in terms of hearing the legislature in terms of what they looked to the PRB for is they really looked at the PRB as a sounding board. They just wanted a heads up. They didn't really ask the PRB to go out and try to fix anything. They didn't ask you to promulgate a bunch of rules, regulations. They wanted you to devise a system where that if there is a problem out there, there's some way that it can be highlighted and brought to their attention. And I would challenge you to remember that, and don't get too zealous and too overboard unless you want to take on the full responsibility of managing all of the pension funds throughout the whole state, investing the monies and taking on the responsibility and becoming a fiduciary. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Appreciate it. Any other public comments? Mr. Stacy.
Well, David Stacy again, but I want to make this perfectly clear. Comments I will make now are simply my opinion, and I do not represent anybody, any board, any fund, or anybody else. Now, there may be others that might choose to agree in principle, but I'm making this in public because other public comments were made. Dallas Police and Fire has some real challenges before it. And no one is better situated than the Board of Trustees of Dallas Fire, or Dallas Police and Fire, to understand, fully understand, what their challenges are. And while there can be lots of academic discussions and armchair quarterbacking about what ought to be, or what I wish it was, that board is charged with the fiduciary responsibility of doing the best they can with the cards they're dealt. And to the extent that they don't have enough cards, to figure out how they can get whatever cards they can to deal the hand they're dealt. Mr. Chair, directed specifically at you, you chose to make a grandstanding public relations foray in Dallas here a week ago, at a time which I would equate to crying fire in a crowded auditorium, which, by the way, is illegal. And at the very least, is just wrong. And for a state chair, a chair of a state agency, regardless of the fact that the Pension Review Board is not specifically listed as most other agencies in the state of Texas are, prohibiting such activity, it certainly was in poor taste. And I feel compelled to make that public comment, and that's simply my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stacy. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I think that wraps up our business for the day. If there's no other further business and there's no objection, the chair moves to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.